It started as just another quiet shift, until a wealthy stranger rushed out, leaving behind a wallet stuffed with cash. For a man barely making rent, it could have been the answer to every problem. But instead of keeping it, he gave it back. That's when everything turned upside down. Because this heir wasn't living the life you'd expect, was cut off, broke, and on the edge of losing everything. And now, he's asking the single dad for help in a family battle so ruthless, it could destroy them both. Why would a poor man risk everything for someone he barely knows? And what secret will turn this act of honesty into the moment that changes both their lives forever? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun struggled to break through the heavy clouds, casting a gray light through the diner's windows. Tommy Hayes ran a well-worn cloth across the counter in slow, methodical circles, the familiar motion as much a part of his morning routine as breathing. The radio on the shelf behind him played Amazing Grace, the melody mixing with the soft hum of the coffee maker and the clink of dishes from the kitchen. He paused his wiping to check his watch. 8:15 a.m. Maddie would be at school by now. Mrs. Peterson from next door had offered to drive her today, a blessing since his early shift meant he couldn't do it himself. The thought of his daughter made him smile, remembering how she'd hugged him extra tight this morning, her backpack full of art supplies for her favorite class. The bell above the door chimed, pulling Tommy from his thoughts. A young man in an expertly tailored charcoal suit stepped in, looking like he'd walked off a magazine cover and into their small-town diner by mistake. His presence seemed to change the very air in the room, expensive cologne mixing with the homey scent of coffee and bacon. "Welcome to Hayes' Diner," Tommy said, tucking the cloth into his apron pocket. "Counter or booth?" The man glanced around, his shoulders tense. "Booth, please, something quiet." Tommy grabbed a menu and led him to a corner booth away from the window. Up close, he noticed the dark circles under the young man's eyes, a stark contrast to his polished appearance. The stranger's Rolex caught the light as he slid into the booth, probably worth more than Tommy made in 6 months. "Can I start you with some coffee?" "Please, black." The man, who Tommy would later learn was Andrew Caldwell, pulled out a sleek phone and began scrolling before Tommy could even set down the menu. Tommy returned with the coffee pot, filling a white ceramic mug with the diner's signature blend. "Ready to order?" Andrew barely looked up. "Whatever's hearty. I trust your judgment." His phone buzzed, and he immediately pressed it to his ear. Caldwell speaking. Tommy jotted down the house special. 3 eggs over easy, hash browns, bacon, sausage, and toast, and headed to the kitchen. As he called out the order to Chuck, the cook, he couldn't help but notice how Andrew's voice carried through the quiet diner, sharp and professional, but with an undercurrent of strain. "No, that's not acceptable. I don't care what the board thinks. No, I won't be bullied into." "Listen, just hold them off until." The conversations blended together as Tommy moved between tables, refilling coffee cups and taking orders from the handful of regular customers who had trickled in. When Tommy delivered Andrew's breakfast, perfectly plated, steam rising invitingly, the young man barely acknowledged it. He picked at the eggs between calls, his coffee growing cold. The hash browns remained untouched, and only one piece of toast had a single bite taken from its corner. The phone calls continued, growing increasingly tense. "You can't be serious. That's my father's doing, isn't it?" "No, I won't back down." "Fine, fine." Andrew's voice cracked on the last word, drawing concerned glances from other patrons. Tommy kept his distance, recognizing the look of someone fighting private battles. He'd seen that same expression in his mirror plenty of times after losing his wife, trying to figure out how to raise Maddie alone while keeping the diner afloat. As the morning wore on, the clouds outside grew darker, promising rain. Andrew's calls became shorter, more clipped, until finally he just sat staring at his phone, shoulders slumped. The untouched breakfast had long since gone cold. Tommy was about to offer to reheat the plate when Andrew suddenly stood up, pulling out his wallet. He dropped some cash on the table, not waiting for change. "Keep it," he muttered, already heading for the door. In his haste, Andrew nearly collided with old Mr. Jenkins coming in for his usual late-morning coffee. "Sorry," Andrew mumbled, sidestepping the elderly man and pushing through the door. The bell jingled sharply, and then he was gone, disappearing into the gray morning. Tommy watched through the window as Andrew's figure grew smaller, his expensive suit making him look like a dark smudge against the colorless sky. There was something about the young man's departure that tugged at Tommy's conscience, a familiar weight of someone carrying too much alone. Moving to clear the table, Tommy stacked the barely touched plates and gathered the silverware. As he reached for the napkin dispenser, something caught his eye under the booth seat. Bending down, he found himself staring at a black leather wallet, sleek and expensive like everything else about its owner. Tommy picked it up, the leather smooth and cool against his fingers. The wallet felt heavy, substantial in a way that spoke of more than just leather and cards. He straightened up slowly, the wallet seeming to grow heavier with each passing second as he stood there, lost in thought while Amazing Grace played softly in the background for the second time that morning. Tommy pushed through the swinging door into the break room, the wallet heavy in his hands. The small space smelled of microwave popcorn and coffee, with its worn Formica table and two mismatched chairs. A collection of employee photos hung crooked on the wall, happy moments from staff picnics and holiday parties. His eyes caught on one showing him Maddie and Sarah at last year's Christmas gathering, before the cancer took his wife. He sank into a chair, setting the wallet on the table. The leather gleamed under the fluorescent lights, expensive and pristine. For a moment, he just stared at it, his calloused fingers drumming against the table's scratched surface. "Just take a look," he muttered to himself. "Need to know who to contact." The wallet opened with a soft creak. Inside, everything was organized with military precision. Credit cards lined up perfectly in their slots, all bearing the distinctive platinum and black designs of elite accounts. Behind them, a New York driver's license showed Andrew's face, looking more relaxed than the man Tommy had served this morning. His fingers brushed against something else. Crisp bills, neatly folded. Tommy's breath caught as he counted them. $50 bills. $5,000. More money than he'd held at once in years. The amount hit him like a physical weight. His rent was 2 weeks late. Mrs. Rodriguez was being patient, but she had her own bills to pay. Maddie's orthodontist had started sending reminder notices about her braces payment. And just yesterday, his old Chevy had made that worrying rattle again. $5,000 would fix everything, would give them breathing room for the first time since Sarah got sick. The break room door squeaked open. Tommy quickly folded the bills back into place as Gina walked in, her gray-streaked hair escaping from its bun after a busy morning of waiting tables. "Taking an early break, Tommy?" She grabbed her lunch bag from the small refrigerator, then noticed the wallet. Well, what we got here?" "Found it under the booth where that young guy in the suit was sitting." Tommy held up the business card he'd just discovered. Andrew Caldwell. Caldwell Industries. Gina's eyes widened. "Caldwell? As in Charles Caldwell, the billionaire?" She let out a low whistle. No wonder he looked expensive. Must be the son everyone gossips about. She pulled out her phone, quickly typing. "Yep, there he is. Had a big falling out with Daddy Dearest last year. Something about ethical business practices." Tommy nodded absently, his thumb running over the edge of the wallet. The bills inside seemed to burn against his palm. Gina peered closer at the wallet. "Bet there's enough in there to solve some problems, huh?" Her tone was light, but her eyes were knowing. She'd been there through Sarah's illness, had seen the medical bills pile up. "You know what they say about finders keepers." "Gina." Tommy's voice held a quiet warning. She held up her hands. "Just saying, rich boy probably wouldn't even notice, and you've got Maddie to think about." Maddie. His daughter's face flashed in his mind, her bright smile when she showed him her latest drawing, the way she tried to hide her disappointment when he had to say no to new art supplies. The money in this wallet could give her so much. But then Sarah's voice echoed in his memory, clear as if she were sitting right beside him. It was one of the last pieces of advice she'd given him, lying in that sterile hospital room. "Your word is the only treasure you can't buy back, Tommy. Make sure Maddie knows that." He could almost feel Sarah's hand on his shoulder, gentle but firm. The same way she'd steadied him through 20 years of marriage, through every tough decision and moment of doubt. Tommy pulled out his phone, his movements decisive now. The business cardstock was thick, expensive, with raised lettering that caught the light. The phone number was printed in clear, bold digits. Gina watched him, shaking her head with a mix of exasperation and admiration. "You're too good for your own good, Tommy Hayes." She grabbed her lunch and headed for the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. "But I suppose that's why we all love you." Tommy smiled faintly, already dialing the number. Each button press felt like both a weight and a relief. The right choice wasn't always the easy one. Sarah had taught him that too. He took a deep breath as the phone began to ring, the wallet sitting innocent and tempting on the table before him. $5,000 could solve so many problems. But his word, his example to Maddie, that was worth more than all the money in the world. The line clicked as someone picked up. Tommy straightened in his chair, his voice steady as he spoke. "Hello, I'm trying to reach Andrew Caldwell. This is Tommy Hayes from Hayes' Diner. I believe you left something important behind this morning." The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the diner's windows as Tommy refilled coffee cups for the few remaining lunch customers. The bell above the door chimed softly, and a sleek black sedan pulled up outside, its tinted windows reflecting the autumn light. Tommy's heart quickened. He recognized the car from this morning. Andrew Caldwell hurried through the door, his expensive suit slightly rumpled now, his earlier composed demeanor replaced by visible anxiety. His eyes darted around the diner until they found Tommy behind the counter. Relief washed over his face as he made his way over, weaving between the red vinyl booths. "Mr. Hayes?" Andrew's voice carried a mix of hope and uncertainty. "I got your call about—" Tommy reached beneath the counter and pulled out the wallet. "Found this after you left this morning. Figured you might be missing it." Andrew's shoulders sagged with relief as he took the wallet, his hands trembling slightly as he opened it. Tommy watched as the younger man's eyes widened, checking through its contents. The carefully arranged credit cards, the business cards, and finally, the thick fold of cash, all exactly as they had been. It's all here," Andrew said softly, looking up at Tommy with disbelief. "Everything. Even the cash." He ran a hand through his dark hair, mussing it further. "I've been sick thinking about this all day. Canceled all my cards, called every place I'd been." He shook his head. "I never expected." "Just doing what's right," Tommy said simply, wiping down the counter with a clean cloth. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, catching on the chrome fixtures and creating little rainbows on the worn formica. Andrew pulled out the stack of bills, his movements precise despite his obvious emotion. "Please, let me give you something for your honesty. $500? It's the least I can do." He held out 5 crisp $100 bills. But Tommy stepped back, raising his hands. "That's not necessary. Really." "I insist." Andrew's voice grew firmer, more like the businessman he appeared to be. "Do you know how rare it is to find someone truly honest these days? Someone who could have easily taken advantage but chose not to?" He laid the money on the counter between them. "My father always says everyone has a price. Today, you proved him wrong." Tommy hesitated, his hand hovering over the bills. He thought of Maddie's braces, of the rent due, of his rattling car. "I appreciate the offer, but—" "Please," Andrew interrupted, his expression earnest. "Let me do this. Not as a reward for doing the right thing, but because you've restored my faith in people. That's worth far more than $500. A comfortable silence settled between them as Tommy considered the money. The afternoon sun had shifted, painting the diner in warm golden light. The radio played softly in the background, an old country song about trust and honor. Finally, Tommy nodded, carefully folding the bills and tucking them into his pocket. "Thank you. This will help." Andrew smiled, some of the weariness leaving his face. Then his eyes lit up with an idea. "Actually, I'd like to do one more thing, if you'll let me." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an elegant envelope. "There's a charity gala this Saturday night at the Highland Hotel. It's for the Children's Hospital Foundation." He placed the envelope on the counter. "I'd be honored if you and your daughter would come as my guests." Tommy stared at the envelope, its cream-colored paper looking out of place among the diner's worn surfaces. "That's very kind, but we're not really the gala type." "Neither am I, to be honest," Andrew admitted with a slight laugh. "But I'm required to attend, and I'd feel better knowing there's at least one honest person in the room." He pushed the envelope closer. "Please come, both of you. It's a family-friendly event. There will be other children there." Tommy thought of Maddie, how her eyes would light up at the chance to dress up and go somewhere fancy. She'd been so strong through everything, the loss of her mother, the tight budgets, the times he had to work late. Maybe they both deserved a night of something special. "What time does it start?" Tommy asked, finally picking up the envelope. Andrew's face brightened. 7 o'clock. There's dinner, dancing, and they're bringing in some local artists to do demonstrations for the kids. He pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. "Here's my personal number. Call me if you need anything. Directions, advice on attire, whatever." The bell above the door chimed again as new customers entered. Tommy tucked the envelope and card into his apron pocket. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. We'll be there." "Andrew, please," he corrected, extending his hand. "And thank you again, Mr. Hayes, for everything." Tommy shook his hand, noting the genuine warmth in the younger man's grip. "Tommy." Andrew nodded, a small smile playing at his lips as he turned to leave. He paused at the door, looking back over his shoulder. "You know, my father would say I'm naive for trusting a stranger with my wallet, but I think sometimes you have to trust people to remind yourself why trust matters in the first place." With that, he stepped out into the afternoon sun. The black sedan pulled away smoothly, leaving Tommy standing behind his counter, feeling the weight of the envelope in his pocket and thinking about trust, faith, and the unexpected ways life could surprise you. The new customers settled into a booth, menus crackling as they opened them. Tommy picked up his coffee pot, ready to return to his regular routine. But something felt different now, lighter perhaps. Like maybe good things really did happen to good people, even on ordinary Tuesday afternoons in small-town diners. The kitchen in Tommy's small apartment filled with the rich aroma of tomato sauce and garlic as he stirred the pot of spaghetti. Steam rose in lazy spirals, fogging the window that looked out over the quiet street below. The radiator hummed steadily, keeping the autumn chill at bay, while Maddie sat at their worn kitchen table, her math homework spread out before her. "Dad," Maddie called out, tapping her pencil against her textbook. "What's 7 times 8 again?" 56, Tommy answered, testing a strand of pasta between his fingers. "Almost done with those multiplication tables?" "Almost." Maddie scribbled the answer down, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, so much like her mother's used to be. Just 2 more problems. Tommy reached for the colander in the dish rack, his mind drifting to the cream-colored envelope sitting in his jacket pocket. He'd been thinking about it all afternoon, trying to figure out how to tell Maddie about the invitation. As he drained the pasta, sending clouds of steam toward the ceiling, he decided there was no time like the present. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, giving the spaghetti a quick shake. "Something interesting happened at work today." "Did Mrs. Peterson order 3 desserts again?" Maddie asked, without looking up from her homework. Tommy chuckled, remembering the elderly woman's legendary sweet tooth. "No, not this time. Actually, we got invited to a party, a fancy one." That got her attention. Maddie's head snapped up, her brown eyes wide with curiosity. "A fancy party? Like in the movies?" "Sort of." Tommy began plating their dinner, the red sauce bright against the white ceramic. "It's called a gala. At the Highland Hotel this Saturday night. There'll be dancing and music, and they're bringing in artists to do demonstrations for the kids." Maddie pushed her homework aside, practically bouncing in her chair. "Really? Can we go? Please, please, please?" Tommy set their plates on the table, watching his daughter's face light up with excitement. "Well, I already said yes. It's for a good cause, the Children's Hospital Foundation." "Oh my gosh!" Maddie clapped her hands together, then suddenly froze. Her expression turned thoughtful, almost worried. "But what will we wear?" Tommy sat down across from her, reaching for the Parmesan cheese. "That's something we need to figure out. I suppose I could rent a suit from—" "Dad!" Maddie interrupted, her eyes sparkling. Could I maybe wear Mom's blue dress? The one in the cedar chest?" Tommy's hand stilled over his spaghetti. The dress had been one of Sarah's favorites, a flowing blue number she'd worn to her cousin's wedding. He could still picture her twirling in it, laughing as he'd pulled her close for a dance. They'd carefully packed it away after she passed, along with other precious memories. "It might need some adjusting," he said softly, watching Maddie's face. "Your mom was taller than you. But Mrs. Rodriguez down the hall does alterations, remember? She fixed my school uniform last month." Maddie's voice was eager but gentle, as if she understood the weight of the request. "Mom would want someone to wear it again, wouldn't she? To another happy party?" Tommy felt his throat tighten. "Yeah, sweetie, I think she would." After dinner, they pulled the cedar chest from Tommy's closet. The familiar scent of wood and mothballs filled the air as they lifted the lid. Maddie reverently touched the tissue paper wrapped around the dress, helping Tommy unfold it with careful hands. The blue fabric caught the light from Tommy's bedside lamp, still as vibrant as the day Sarah had first worn it. Maddie held it up against herself, the hem pooling on the floor. "It's perfect," she whispered, running her fingers over the delicate beading at the waist. Like it was waiting for a special occasion. They spent the rest of the evening on their worn couch, watching old movies on TV, the the kind with glamorous ballrooms and elaborate dance scenes. Maddie asked questions about everything: what kind of shoes she should wear, how to do her hair, whether there would be fancy desserts like in the movies. "Do you think there will be a chocolate fountain?" she asked, curled up against Tommy's side. "Ginny had one at her birthday party last year." "Maybe," Tommy smiled, running his hand over her hair. "But don't get any ideas about sticking your whole hand under it like Ginny's little brother did." Maddie giggled, then grew quiet for a moment. "Dad, why did that man invite us? The one who lost his wallet?" Tommy considered how to explain it. "His name is Andrew Caldwell. I found his wallet at the diner and returned it to him. He wanted to thank us." "Was there a lot of money in it?" "Yes," Tommy admitted. "But that's not why I returned it." Maddie nodded sagely. "Because it was the right thing to do, like you always tell me." "Exactly." Tommy hugged her closer, proud of how naturally she understood. "He must be really rich to go to fancy parties all the time," Maddie mused, watching as an elegant couple waltzed across the TV screen. "Probably," Tommy agreed, remembering Andrew's expensive suit and watch. "But you know what? He seemed kind of lonely." "How can someone be lonely if they're rich?" Maddie asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "Money doesn't always make people happy, sweetheart. Sometimes it can make things more complicated." Later that night, after they'd finished their movie marathon, Tommy tucked Maddie into bed. She was still chattering excitedly about the gala, her eyes heavy with sleep. "Can we practice dancing tomorrow?" she yawned. "I don't want to step on anyone's toes." "Sure thing, princess." Tommy kissed her forehead. "Sweet dreams." He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching as her breathing evened out into sleep. The nightlight cast a soft glow across her face, so peaceful and full of anticipation for Saturday night. Moving to the living room window, Tommy watched fat snowflakes beginning to fall, dusting the street below with white. His mind wandered back to Andrew, the weariness in his eyes despite his youth, the way he'd seemed surprised by a simple act of honesty. For someone who could afford expensive suits and $500 thank you gifts, he'd looked almost envious when he'd watched Tommy joking with the regular customers at the diner. The snow continued to fall silently outside, and Tommy thought about wealth and loneliness, about honest people and trust, about blue dresses and daughters growing up too fast. Somewhere across town, in what he imagined was a much fancier apartment, Andrew Caldwell was probably still awake too, maybe watching the same snow, carrying his own weight of memories and expectations. Tommy adjusted his tie for the 10th time, catching his reflection in the hallway mirror. The navy blue suit, bought years ago for a cousin's wedding, felt a bit tight around the shoulders now. He smoothed down the slightly worn lapels, wishing he'd had time to get it properly pressed. "Dad, can you help me with my hair?" Maddie called from the bathroom. He found her perched on a step stool, struggling with a white ribbon. Her mother's blue dress had needed only minor adjustments, and seeing her in it made his heart catch. Sarah would have loved to see their daughter like this. "Here, sweetie, let me try." His large hands were better suited to carrying plates than styling hair, but he learned a few tricks over the years. "How's that?" Maddie beamed at her reflection. "Perfect. Do you think they'll be dancing?" "Maybe," Tommy chuckled. "Just remember what we talked about. Be myself, say please and thank you, and don't stuff my pockets with fancy chocolates," Maddie recited, rolling her eyes good-naturedly. A gentle knock at the door made them both jump. Tommy opened it to find Andrew standing there in an impeccably tailored tuxedo, though his smile seemed a touch nervous. "You both look wonderful," Andrew said, his eyes crinkling warmly. "Maddie, that dress is absolutely beautiful." Maddie did a little twirl. "It was my mom's. Dad kept it special." A flash of understanding crossed Andrew's face as he glanced at Tommy. "She would be very proud, shall we?" The black sedan's leather seats were softer than anything Tommy had ever felt. Maddie's eyes were wide as saucers as they drove through downtown, the city lights reflecting off the freshly fallen snow. The Grand Plaza Hotel rose before them like something from a fairy tale, its marble facade lit up against the dark sky. A uniformed valet opened their doors, and Tommy had to remind himself not to tip. Andrew had explained that was taken care of. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers cast rainbow sparkles across the crowd. Ladies in flowing gowns moved like colorful butterflies between clusters of men in black tie. A string quartet played softly from a corner stage. "Oh my goodness," Maddie whispered, clutching Tommy's hand. "It's just like in the movies." Andrew guided them toward the buffet tables, laden with tiny delicacies Tommy couldn't name. Please, help yourselves. The chocolate-covered strawberries are especially good. Maddie needed no second invitation, carefully selecting treats onto a small plate while Tommy watched, amused. He noticed Andrew scanning the room, his shoulders tensing slightly whenever certain guests approached their direction. "Mr. Caldwell," an older woman in an emerald dress swooped toward them. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight." Andrew's smile became fixed. "Mrs. Whitmore, yes, I'm here with my friends." He gestured to Tommy and Maddie. "Tommy Hayes and his daughter Maddie." Mrs. Whitmore's eyebrows rose slightly. "How nice. And how is your father? We've all been so concerned." "I wouldn't know," Andrew replied stiffly. "If you'll excuse us." He steered them toward a quieter corner, where Maddie was immediately captivated by a young girl her age, wearing a pink dress. The girls began chatting about their favorite books, and Tommy watched as his daughter effortlessly made a new friend. Throughout the next hour, Tommy observed Andrew declining champagne in favor of water, his eyes constantly moving to the entrance, as if expecting, or dreading, someone's arrival. When a cluster of older men in expensive suits entered, Andrew practically disappeared behind a large flower arrangement. Tommy recognized that look. It was the same one he'd worn at the first parent-teacher conference after Sarah died, when all the other parents' pitying glances became too much to bear. The string quartet started a waltz, and several couples moved to the dance floor. Maddie watched them longingly until her new friend's parents invited her to join them at their table, where other children were gathering. "Go ahead." Tommy nodded, knowing she was itching to socialize. "Stay where I can see you." As Maddie skipped off, Andrew touched Tommy's elbow. "Could we talk somewhere private?" His voice was low, almost apologetic. "There's something I need to explain." Tommy noticed the slight tremor in Andrew's usually steady hands. "Of course." They moved toward a set of French doors leading to a small terrace. Behind them, the music swelled, and Maddie's laugh rang out clear and sweet above the crowd's murmur. Tommy glanced back to see her showing another girl how to make a napkin swan, a trick she'd learned from countless hours at the diner. The terrace doors opened onto a heated outdoor space, empty now in the winter chill. Snow fell softly beyond the glass enclosure, and the city lights twinkled below like earthbound stars. Andrew walked to the railing, his shoulders hunched against some invisible weight. Tommy waited patiently. In his years of running the diner, he learned that people usually found their words if you gave them enough quiet to gather them. "The wallet you found?" Andrew finally said, turning to face him. "The money in it? That was everything I had left." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Tommy remembered the crisp bills, how they had seemed so tempting in his moment of need. Now, looking at Andrew's troubled face, he began to understand there was much more to the story. "That day at the diner," Andrew continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "I was running away from all of this." He gestured toward the glittering ballroom behind them. "From what my father wanted me to become." Tommy leaned against the railing, feeling the cold metal through his thin suit jacket. He didn't speak, but his steady presence seemed to encourage Andrew to continue. "When I realized I'd lost the wallet," Andrew shook his head, "I thought it was over, that I'd have to go back and admit defeat. But then you called." He looked at Tommy with genuine wonder. "You could have kept it, most people would have, but you didn't even hesitate." Inside, the music changed to something slower, more melancholic. Through the glass, Tommy could see Maddie teaching her new friends how to twirl without getting dizzy. She looked so much like her mother in that moment that his heart ached. Andrew straightened his shoulders, as if coming to a decision. "There's something else you should know, something important. The reason I invited you tonight wasn't just to say thank you. I need—" Tommy followed Andrew down a quiet hallway lined with ornate mirrors and soft wall sconces. The muffled sound of orchestra music and cheerful chatter from the ballroom faded behind them. Andrew's polished shoes clicked against the marble floor as he led them to a small sitting area with plush velvet chairs. "Please, sit," Andrew said, gesturing to one of the chairs. His confident demeanor from earlier had slipped away, replaced by something more vulnerable. Tommy settled into the chair, noting how Andrew's hands fidgeted with his tie. The young man paced a few steps before finally taking the seat across from him. "I need to explain something," Andrew began, his voice quieter than before. "That wallet you found it wasn't just some spare cash I was carrying around." Tommy leaned forward slightly, sensing the weight in Andrew's words. The distant crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across their faces. "It was everything I had left," Andrew admitted. running a hand through his carefully styled hair. $5,000. My last bit of money in the world. Tommy's eyes widened. But your family, the Caldwells, aren't they? Worth billions? Andrew gave a hollow laugh. Yes, the Caldwell fortune is quite impressive, but I don't have access to any of it anymore. He loosened his tie slightly. My father cut me off 6 months ago. The revelation hung in the air between them. Tommy thought about the expensive suit Andrew wore, his designer watch, the black sedanal remnants of his former life. You see, Andrew continued, his voice catching slightly, I discovered some things at Caldwell Industries. Dealings that weren't just aggressive business practices, they were wrong. Communities being poisoned by chemical dumps. Safety violations covered up. Workers in overseas factories being exploited. He shook his head. When I confronted my father about it, he gave me a choice. Keep quiet and stay in line, or leave with nothing. Tommy nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. And you chose to leave. I couldn't be part of it, Andrew said firmly, though pain flickered across his face. I couldn't just pretend I didn't know what was happening to real people, families like yours, Tommy. The hallway felt smaller somehow, more intimate, as Andrew's story unfolded. Tommy thought about Maddie in the ballroom, probably still marveling at the fancy dessert table, and felt a surge of respect for the young man before him. That's why I was so shocked when you returned the wallet, Andrew continued. Not just the money, though God knows I needed it, but the fact that you did the right thing, even when no one would have known if you hadn't. He smiled sadly. Do you know how rare that is in my world? To meet someone who chooses integrity over opportunity? Tommy shifted in his chair, uncomfortable with the praise. I just did what anyone should do. But that's just it, they don't, not in my experience. Andrew stood up and walked to one of the mirrors, adjusting his collar. My father's friends, our business partners, even some of our charity board members, they all talk about ethics and responsibility. But when it really matters, he turned back to Tommy. They choose profit every time. Tommy watched as Andrew's reflection multiplied in the mirrors lining the hall, each one showing a different angle of his troubled expression. Is that why you invited us tonight? To meet someone honest? Andrew nodded slowly. Partly. But there's more. He returned to his chair, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. My father is sick. Tommy, cancer. The doctors say he doesn't have much time left. The orchestra in the ballroom struck up a new song, the melody drifting faintly down the hall like a ghost. Tommy thought about loss, about the empty side of his own bed since his wife passed. I'm sorry, Tommy said softly. The thing is, Andrew continued, his voice rough with emotion, for all his faults, he's still my father, and I don't want. He paused, collecting himself. I don't want our last conversation to be about business practices and moral compromises. Tommy nodded, understanding all too well the weight of words left unsaid between family members. I've tried reaching out, Andrew explained, but every attempt ends in an argument. He sees my choices as a betrayal of everything he built. He looked directly at Tommy, his eyes bright with unshed tears. But meeting you, seeing how you handle yourself, how you raise Maddie alone but still keep your principles, it made me think maybe there's hope. The silence stretched between them for a moment, broken only by the distant music and laughter from the gala. Tommy, Andrew said finally, I need to ask you something important. He took a deep breath. Would you help me try to make peace with my father? Come with me to see him? Tommy's brow furrowed. Me? But I'm just... You're exactly what both my father and I need right now. Andrew interrupted. Someone genuine. Someone who understands both world-hard work and family loyalty. He smiled slightly. Someone who can remind us both what really matters. The request hung in the air between them, as weighty as the crystal chandeliers above. Tommy could hear Maddie's delighted laugh echoing from the ballroom, reminding him of simpler times when his own family was whole. Your father, Tommy said carefully. He's not going to want some diner waiter telling him what to do. No, Andrew agreed, but he might listen to a man who chose honor over $5,000, who raises his daughter with the same values I'm trying to defend. He leaned back in his chair. Besides, you won't be telling him what to do. You'll just be being yourself. Sometimes that's all it takes to help people find their way back to each other. The city lights blurred past the car windows as Tommy drove through the quiet streets, his mind replaying Andrew's words over and over. Maddie sat in the passenger seat, her mother's blue dress shimmering under each street lamp they passed. She hummed softly to herself, still caught up in the magic of the evening. Tommy glanced at his daughter, marveling at how grown-up she looked tonight. The dress fit her perfectly now, though it had been a bit too big when they'd first found it in the back of the closet. His late wife would have loved to see their daughter wearing it. "Dad?" Maddie's voice broke through his thoughts. "You're being really quiet." Tommy managed a small smile. "Just thinking, sweetie. About what Andrew told you." She twisted in her seat to face him. "I saw you two talking in the hallway. You look serious." Sometimes Tommy forgot how observant his daughter could be. "Yeah, that's part of it." "Is he in trouble?" "No, not exactly." Tommy slowed for a red light. "He just needs some help with something important." The light turned green, and they drove another block in silence before Maddie spoke again. "I like him. He reminds me of that sad puppy we saw at the shelter last month. You know, the one that looked fancy but just wanted someone to play with?" Tommy couldn't help but chuckle at the comparison. "That's an interesting way of putting it." They pulled into their apartment complex's parking lot, the old asphalt crunching under the tires. Tommy helped Maddie out of the car, careful not to let her dress drag. As they climbed the stairs to their second-floor apartment, he could feel the weight of Andrew's request settling more heavily on his shoulders. Inside, while Maddie changed into her pajamas, Tommy hung up his suit jacket and loosened his tie. He walked to the kitchen window, staring out at the few stars visible through the city's light pollution. Andrew wanted his help to reconcile with his father, a man Tommy had only read about in newspapers, usually alongside words like ruthless and cutthroat. "Dad?" Maddie padded into the kitchen in her fuzzy slippers, now wearing her favorite cat print pajamas. "Can I have some hot chocolate?" "Sure thing, kiddo." Tommy welcomed the distraction, pulling out the milk and cocoa powder. As he stirred the warming milk on the stove, Maddie perched on a kitchen chair, her legs swinging. "I think you should help Andrew," she said suddenly. Tommy paused his stirring. "Oh, why's that?" "Because everyone needs a dad who listens." Maddie said it so matter-of-factly, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "And Andrew looks sad when he talks about his dad. Kind of like how Joey at school looks when he talks about his dad being away." Tommy sprinkled cocoa into the milk, thinking about his own father, or rather, the absence of one. He'd been barely older than Maddie when his father walked out, leaving nothing but a half-empty closet and a lifetime of missed birthdays. The memory still stung, even after all these years. "Sometimes it's not that simple, honey," Tommy said, pouring the hot chocolate into Maddie's favorite mug, the one with little cats around the rim. "Grown-up problems can be complicated. But you always tell me that doing the right thing isn't supposed to be easy." Maddie wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "That's why it's important." Tommy sat down across from her, watching as she carefully blew on her hot chocolate. His daughter's simple wisdom often left him speechless. She was right, of course. He'd spent years teaching her about doing the right thing, about being there for people who needed help. How could he ignore his own lessons now? "When did you get so smart?" he asked, reaching over to ruffle her hair. Maddie giggled. "I learned from you, silly." They sat together in comfortable silence while Maddie finished her hot chocolate. Tommy thought about Andrew, about the genuine pain in his eyes when he talked about his father, about the courage it must have taken to walk away from a fortune rather than compromise his principles. Maybe this was one of those moments where doing the right thing meant taking a risk. After tucking Maddie into bed and reading her favorite chapter from Charlotte's Web, Tommy sat on the edge of his own bed, holding his phone. It was too late to call Andrew now, but he'd made up his mind. Sometimes the best way to heal old wounds was to help others heal theirs. The next morning, after getting Maddie off to school, Tommy pulled out the business card Andrew had given him. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window as he dialed the number, casting warm patches on the worn linoleum floor. Andrew answered on the second ring. "Hello?" "Andrew, it's Tommy. Tommy Hayes." He took a deep breath. "About what you asked last night. I've been thinking about it, and I want to help. If you still want me to, that is." There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then Andrew's voice came back, thick with emotion. "Really? You'll help me?" "Yeah," Tommy said, feeling more certain with each word. "Everyone deserves a chance to make things right with their father, even if it's hard, even if it's scary." "Thank you, Tommy." Andrew's voice was quiet but sincere. "You don't know what this means to me." "Well," Tommy smiled slightly, thinking of Maddie's words, "let's just say a very wise 10-year-old helped me make up my mind." The Monday morning sun struggled to break through thick clouds as Andrew's black sedan pulled up to Tommy's apartment building. Tommy adjusted his tie one last time, the same one he'd worn to the gala, and grabbed the small overnight bag he'd packed. Maddie bounced beside him, clutching her backpack filled with colored pencils and her sketchbook. "You sure about this, sweetie?" Tommy asked, looking down at his daughter. "Mrs. Peterson said you could stay with her if you want." Maddie shook her head firmly. "I want to come with you, Dad. Besides, big houses probably have lots of things to draw." Andrew stepped out of the car to help with their bags, his usual sharp suit replaced by a more casual sweater and slacks. "Good morning, Hayes family," he said with a warm smile, though Tommy noticed the tension around his eyes. "Ready for a little road trip?" "You bet," Maddie chirped, climbing into the back seat. "I brought snacks." The inside of the sedan smelled like leather and coffee. As they pulled away from the curb, Tommy watched his apartment building shrink in the side mirror. 2 hours. That's all this was supposed to take. So why did it feel like such a big step? Light snow began to drift down as they merged onto the highway, dusting the landscape in white. Maddie pressed her nose against the window, watching the flakes swirl past. "I spy with my little eye," she announced. "Something white." "Is it the snow?" Andrew asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Nope, guess again. That truck over there?" "No, silly. It's that church steeple." She pointed to a white spire rising above the trees. Andrew chuckled. "You're good at this game. We used to play it on long drives when I was little, my mother and I." Tommy noticed how Andrew's grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "You mentioned the house is pretty big," he said carefully. 28 rooms, Andrew replied, though most of them were just for show. Father always said, appearance matters more than comfort. He paused, then added more quietly, "I used to roller skate in the ballroom when he was away on business trips. The marble floors were perfect for it." "Did you get in trouble?" Maddie asked. A sad smile crossed Andrew's face. "Once. Left some scuff marks. Father hired someone to polish the entire floor by hand. Then he took the skates away, said they were for children, and Caldwells grow up fast." Tommy watched the countryside roll past, old farmhouses and bare trees glazed with frost. Must have been lonely in such a big place. "It was," Andrew admitted. "Like living in a museum. Don't touch this. Don't sit there. Always be presentable." The staff were nice, but they couldn't really be friends. Father said it would blur the lines. "What about your mom?" Maddie asked innocently. Andrew was quiet for a moment. "She passed away when I was 14. Cancer. After that, the house felt even bigger and emptier. Father, he dealt with it by working more. Said we had to be strong, keep moving forward, no time for grief." Tommy recognized the pain in Andrew's voice, the same ache he carried for Maddie's mother. "Sometimes being strong means letting yourself feel things," he said softly. "Yeah," Andrew replied. "Took me a long time to learn that. Father never did." They played a few more rounds of I Spy as the morning wore on. Maddie spotted a red barn, a flock of geese, and what she insisted was a unicorn but turned out to be a particularly majestic-looking white horse. The easy game seemed to help Andrew relax, drawing out memories of happier time. "There was this one summer," he shared, "when the kitchen staff let me help make ice cream, real hand-churned stuff. Father found out and said it wasn't appropriate for a Caldwell to do servant's work." He shook his head. "But those were some of the best afternoons I remember. Just talking and laughing while we took turns with the churn." The highway gave way to smaller roads, winding through expensive neighborhoods with large houses set back behind perfect lawns. But they kept going, the houses growing further apart until they reached what looked like private parkland. "Almost there," Andrew said, his voice getting tighter again. They turned onto a tree-lined drive, ancient oaks creating a tunnel of bare branches overhead. The snow was falling harder now, but the road was clear and salted. Finally, they rounded a curve, and Tommy heard Maddie gasp. Rising before them were enormous iron gates, at least 15 feet high, with an ornate C worked into the metalwork. Beyond them, partially obscured by the swirling snow, stood Caldwell Estate. Tommy had seen big houses before, but this was something else entirely, a massive stone mansion that looked like it had been plucked from an old English countryside and dropped into the American Midwest. Andrew slowed the car to a stop in front of the gates. He reached for a small remote in the console, then hesitated, his hand hovering over it. "You okay?" Tommy asked quietly. "Haven't been here in 3 years." Andrew replied, staring through the windshield at his childhood home. "Last time, well, let's just say there was a lot of shouting. On both sides." Sometimes the hardest doors to open are the ones that lead home, Tommy said. Maddie leaned forward between the seats. It looks like a castle, she whispered, but kind of scary too. Andrew gave her a grateful smile. You're right on both counts, Miss Maddie. He took a deep breath and picked up the remote. Well, no turning back now. The gates began to swing open with a low mechanical hum, revealing the long driveway that led up to the mansion's front steps. The snow swirled around them like a curtain being drawn aside, inviting them into Andrew's past. The wrought iron gates of Caldwell Estate creaked open with mechanical precision, revealing a world Tommy Hayes had only seen in movies. The long driveway curved through pristine gardens, where even the snow seemed arranged with purpose. Bare trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches reaching toward a mansion that dominated the landscape. Home sweet home, Andrew muttered from the driver's seat, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Maddie pressed her face against the car window, her breath fogging the glass. It's like a castle, Dad. Tommy nodded, taking in the enormous stone structure. 3 stories of aged limestone rose before them, with tall windows that reflected the gray winter sky. Carved columns flanked the entrance, and perfectly trimmed hedges lined the circular driveway where Andrew brought the car to a stop. Before they could reach for their doors, a tall figure in a crisp black suit descended the wide stone steps. The man's posture was rigid, his expression carefully blank as he approached the vehicle. That's Harrison, Andrew whispered. He's been the butler here since before I was born. Harrison opened Andrew's door first, his movements precise and practiced. Welcome home, Mr. Andrew. The words were correct, but the tone held all the warmth of the winter air around them. When Tommy stepped out with Maddie, Harrison's gaze swept over them like a scanner, searching for threats. These must be your guests. The pause before the last word spoke volumes. Yes, Andrew said, straightening his shoulders. This is Mr. Tommy Hayes and his daughter Maddie. They'll be staying with us for a few days. Harrison's thin lips pressed together. I see. Your father's in his study. He's expecting you. His eyes lingered on Tommy's well-worn shoes before he turned to lead them inside. The entrance hall took Tommy's breath away. A crystal chandelier hung from a ceiling 2 stories high, casting rainbow reflections across marble floors. A sweeping staircase curved up both sides of the room, its mahogany railings gleaming with generations of polish. Oil paintings of stern-faced men, presumably Caldwells of the past, stared down from gilt frames. Your coats? Harrison said, holding out his arms with the air of someone handling potentially contaminated materials. As they shed their winter wear, Tommy noticed Maddie trying to smooth her dress, suddenly conscious of their everyday clothes in this museum-like setting. He gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. Harrison led them through corridors where their footsteps were swallowed by thick carpets. The air smelled of furniture polish and old books, but beneath it was a staleness that reminded Tommy of closed rooms and unused spaces. They passed closed doors and rooms glimpsed through archways. A formal dining room with a table long enough to seat 20, a music room where a grand piano sat draped in silence, a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves. Everything was immaculate, but nothing felt lived in. The study is through here, Harrison announced, stopping before a heavy wooden door. He knocked 3 times, waiting for a gruff enter before opening it. The study was smaller than Tommy expected, but no less impressive. Dark wood paneling covered the walls, broken by built-in bookshelves and a massive stone fireplace where logs crackled. The winter light filtered through leaded glass windows, casting patterns on an oriental rug. Behind an imposing desk sat Charles Caldwell. Despite his age and rumored illness, he radiated authority. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his clothes expertly tailored, but it was his eyes that commanded attention, sharp and calculating beneath heavy brows. Those eyes fixed on Andrew first, narrowing slightly. So you finally decided to come home. His voice was deep, with the kind of tone that expected immediate attention in boardrooms. Hello, Father, Andrew said quietly. Charles Caldwell's gaze shifted to Tommy and Maddie, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. He studied them as one might examine insects under glass. And this must be the Good Samaritan I've heard about. The words dripped with sarcasm. The waiter who so nobly returned my son's wallet. How touching. Tommy felt Maddie press closer to his side. He placed a protective hand on her shoulder. Mr. Hayes showed me more kindness than, Andrew began, but his father cut him off with a wave. Yes, yes, and now you've brought him here, like some stray you've dragged in from the street. Charles leaned back in his leather chair, his lips curving in a dismissive smile. "Tell me, Mr. Hayes, what exactly do you hope to gain from this little visit?" Tommy's jaw clenched, the muscles working beneath his skin. He could feel the heat rising in his face, the instinct to defend himself surging up. But he thought of Andrew's nervous expression in the car, of Maddie watching, of his late wife's gentle reminder that sometimes the strongest response was silence. He kept his face neutral, his voice steady, refusing to give Charles Caldwell the reaction he clearly wanted. The insult hung in the air between them, but Tommy stood his ground, meeting the older man's gaze without flinching. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of the Caldwell mansion's dining room. Tommy sat uncomfortably in a high-backed chair that probably cost more than his monthly rent, trying not to fidget with the heavy silver fork beside his plate. The massive oak table could have seated 20, but only 4 places were set, spaced far apart as if to emphasize the emotional distance between them. Charles Caldwell sat at the head of the table, his posture rigid despite his age, cutting his roast beef into precise squares without looking up. The only sounds were the quiet clink of silverware against fine china and the tick-tock of a grandfather clock in the corner. "The chef prepared this specifically for tonight," Andrews said, attempting to break the silence. "It's his specialty." Charles didn't acknowledge his son's comment. Instead, he reached for his wine glass, his hand trembling slightly before steadying. Tommy noticed how Andrew's shoulders slumped at the continued cold shoulder from his father. Maddie sat next to Tommy, her feet dangling above the floor. She'd barely touched her food, but Tommy noticed she had pulled out her worn sketchbook and colored pencils, her constant companions. She worked quietly, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration as her pencil moved across the paper. The butler appeared silently at Charles's elbow to refill his water glass. "Will there be anything else, sir?" "This meat is overdone," Charles said sharply. "Tell Marcus he's slipping." Tommy saw Andrew wince at his father's harshness, but before anyone could respond, Maddie's pencil clattered to the floor, rolling toward Charles's chair. She slipped down to retrieve it, and as she stood up, Charles's eyes finally landed on her sketchbook. "What are you doing there, young lady?" His tone wasn't exactly warm, but it held a hint of curiosity that had been absent all afternoon. Maddie clutched her sketchbook to her chest, suddenly shy. "I'm drawing your house, sir. It's the biggest one I've ever seen." "Is that so?" Charles raised an eyebrow. "And what makes it worth drawing?" Tommy started to intervene, worried about his daughter being subjected to Charles's sharp tongue, but Andrew caught his eye and gave a slight shake of his head. "Well," Maddie said, her voice growing stronger, "it's like a castle from my storybooks, but it looks kind of lonely without people in the windows. So I added some." Something flickered across Charles's face. Surprise, perhaps? Or something deeper? "May I see?" Maddie glanced at Tommy, who nodded encouragingly. She walked around the table, her patent leather shoes clicking on the hardwood floor, and carefully held out her sketchbook. Charles took it with unexpected gentleness. The page showed a child's view of the mansion, with its many windows and towering chimneys. But what caught everyone's attention were the stick figures Maddie had drawn on the front steps, 4 of them, holding hands. "That's you," Maddie pointed to the tallest figure. "And that's Andrew, and that's my dad, and that's me." She paused, then added softly, "Everyone looks happier when they're holding hands." A sound escaped Charles that took Tommy a moment to identify: a chuckle. It was rough, as if rarely used, but genuine. "You've captured Andrew's terrible posture perfectly," he said. And for just a moment, his eyes met his son's with something almost like warmth. Andrew sat up straighter, blinking rapidly. "I do not slouch," he protested, but there was a tremor of hope in his voice. "And what's this?" Charles pointed to something in the background of the drawing. "Oh, that's a bird family in their nest," Maddie explained. "See, there's a mommy bird and a daddy bird and their babies. They live in that big tree outside." "The oak tree," Charles said quietly. "I used to climb it as a boy." He cleared his throat and handed the sketchbook back to Maddie. "You have talent, young lady, though the proportions need work." Tommy expected Maddie to be hurt by the criticism, but she just smiled. "That's what my art teacher says too, but she says the feeling is more important than getting everything perfect." Charles's expression changed again, something softening around his eyes. "Your art teacher might have a point." He turned to the butler, who had been standing silently nearby. "James, bring us dessert and some hot chocolate for the artist." The rest of dinner passed in a different kind of silence, less strained, though still careful. Charles occasionally glanced at Maddie's continuing work, and once even asked her to explain another detail in her drawing. Later that night, Tommy led a sleepy Maddie up the grand staircase to their guest room. The plush carpet muffled their footsteps, and the walls were lined with oil paintings in heavy gilt frames. Maddie clutched her sketchbook and stifled a yawn. The guest room was bigger than their entire apartment, with a four-poster bed that Maddie declared was just like a princess's. Tommy helped her change into her pajamas and tucked her under the thick down comforter. "You did good today, sweetheart," he said, kissing her forehead. "Mr. Caldwell isn't as scary as he looks," Maddie mumbled, already half asleep. "He just needs more pictures with people in them." Tommy sat on the edge of the bed until her breathing evened out. As he stood to turn off the lamp, he heard it, the soft notes of a piano drifting up from somewhere downstairs. The melody was classical, something he didn't recognize, but it filled the massive house with a touch of life it had been missing all day. He watched his daughter sleep, illuminated by the soft glow of a nightlight, while the distant piano music played on. Morning light struggled through heavy snowfall, casting soft shadows across the Caldwell estate's grand sitting room. Tommy stood at the window, watching white flakes pile up against the ornate window panes. The storm had intensified overnight, transforming the manicured grounds into a blank canvas of white. "Looks like we're not going anywhere today," Andrew said, joining Tommy at the window. He wore a casual sweater instead of his usual suit, making him appear younger and more relaxed. "The local weather report says it'll keep up until tomorrow." Tommy nodded, thinking of the diner. "I should call Gina, let her know I won't make it back for my shift." "Already taken care of," Andrew assured him. "I had Thompson contact the diner first thing this morning." Maddie bounced into the room, her eyes bright with excitement. "Can we build a snowman later?" She pressed her nose against the cold glass, leaving a small foggy mark. "Perhaps when the storm dies down a bit," Tommy said, smoothing her hair. "It's pretty wild out there right now." The butler, Thompson, appeared silently in the doorway. "Mr. Caldwell would like to know if you'll be joining him in the sitting room." His tone was neutral, but his eyes held a hint of surprise. Andrew's eyebrows rose. "Father wants company?" "He mentioned something about it being nonsense to rattle around separate rooms like ghosts during a storm," Thompson replied, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. The sitting room was smaller than Tommy expected, with worn leather chairs that had clearly been used and loved for years. A fire crackled in the massive stone fireplace, and Charles Caldwell sat in what was obviously his regular spot, a leather-bound book open on his lap. "Well, don't hover in the doorway like salesmen," Charles said gruffly. "Sit down." They arranged themselves around the fire, Maddie choosing a spot on the thick carpet near the hearth where she could continue her drawing. The room fell into an awkward silence, broken only by the pop and crack of burning wood. "Tell me about this diner of yours," Charles said suddenly, addressing Tommy. "Andrew says it's been there 40 years? Tommy straightened in his chair. "Closer to 50 now, sir. Started by old Joe Miller back in '73. His daughter Rosa runs it now, but she kept his recipes. Best apple pie in 3 counties. "Pie's okay," Maddie piped up from her spot on the floor. "But Tommy makes better pancakes than anyone." Charles's eyes flickered with interest. "You cook?" "Had to learn," Tommy said, his voice warm with memory. "After Sarah, my wife, passed, I couldn't keep serving Maddie microwave dinners. Started simple, learned from Rosa and the other cooks. Now I fill in on the grill when needed." "He makes funny faces with the whipped cream," Maddie added, "and sometimes writes messages with syrup." Andrew leaned forward. "What kind of messages?" "Good luck on tests," Tommy explained. "Happy birthday. Whatever might make someone's day a little brighter," he shrugged. "You'd be surprised how many people eat breakfast alone. Sometimes a simple good morning in syrup is the first kind word they see all day." Charles made a sound that might have been a scoff, but his expression had softened slightly. "Reminds me of May's Diner," he said, almost to himself. "Used to get coffee there, back when I worked at Sterling Manufacturing." Andrew's head snapped up. "You never mentioned working at Sterling." "Because it wasn't worth mentioning," Charles replied, but his tone lacked its usual edge. 6 months on the factory floor, making ball bearings. Minimum wage was 90 cents an hour then. He paused, looking into the fire. "May, she ran the diner. She let us factory boys run tabs during hard weeks. Said she'd rather see us fed than proud." Tommy nodded, understanding. "Rosa does the same thing. Some folks can't always pay right away, but hunger doesn't wait for payday." That's poor business sense, Charles said, but without conviction. Maybe, Tommy agreed, but it's good people sense. And funny thing is, those folks always pay their tabs, usually with interest, when they can. Because kindness creates loyalty stronger than any contract. The room fell quiet again, but the silence felt different now, thoughtful rather than tense. Maddie had stopped drawing to listen, her eyes moving between the adults with quiet interest. Did May's Diner have good pancakes too? She asked Charles. A ghost of a smile touched the old man's lips. Best I've ever had. She'd add a little vanilla to the batter, said it was her secret ingredient, but she told that to everyone who asked. That's what Tommy does, Maddie exclaimed. He says it makes them taste like home. Charles's eyes met Tommy's for a moment, something like recognition passing between them. Yes, he said softly. That's exactly what it does. The conversation drifted naturally after that, moving through stories of diners and communities, of small kindnesses remembered decades later. Even Andrew shared a few memories of sneaking down to the estate's kitchen as a boy, where the cook would make him midnight snacks and listen to his dreams. As the morning wore on, Thompson brought coffee and hot chocolate. The storm continued its assault outside, but inside the sitting room, the atmosphere had thawed considerably. Charles even laughed out loud at one of Maddie's innocent observations about how funny adults looked trying to eat spaghetti in fancy clothes. It was nearly lunchtime when Maddie's yawn suggested it was time for a break. Tommy stood, helping her gather her drawing supplies. Perhaps, Charles said, his voice carefully neutral, Thompson could show Maddie the kitchen. I believe Mrs. Powell is baking cookies this afternoon. Maddie's eyes lit up, and after a quick nod from Tommy, she happily followed Thompson out of the room. Andrew excused himself as well, mentioning some calls he needed to make. Tommy headed for the door, but paused when Charles spoke again. May's Diner is gone now, the old man said quietly. Torn down 20 years ago for a parking structure. Progress, they called it. He stared into the fire, lost in thought as Tommy quietly left the room. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 2, its deep chimes echoing through the mansion's marble corridors. Tommy sat in the library, leafing through an old photo album he'd found while Maddie napped upstairs. The snow outside fell in thick, lazy flakes, coating everything in pristine white. Voices drifted from Charles's study down the hall. At first, they were muffled, but they grew louder with each passing minute. Tommy tried not to listen, but Andrew's words carried clearly through the heavy oak door. You can't keep running the company like this, Dad. Those families in Rochester, they deserve better. Don't lecture me about business, boy. Charles's voice was sharp as steel. I built this empire from nothing while you were playing in sandboxes. By crushing anyone who got in your way? That's not success, that's just bullying with a bigger bank account. Tommy shifted uncomfortably in his chair, closing the album. The argument was getting heated, and he felt like an intruder just by being within earshot. You think your principals will keep the lights on? Charles's voice dripped with sarcasm. Feed our employees children? This isn't some fairy tale where good intentions pay the bills. There's always a choice, Andrew shouted. Always. You're just too stubborn to see it. And you're throwing away everything I built for you? Everything. Something crashed inside the study, probably a book being slammed down or a paperweight knocked over. Tommy stood up, unsure whether to intervene or stay put. The study door flew open with a bang. Andrew stormed out, his face flushed red and his hands shaking. He didn't even notice Tommy as he rushed past, heading straight for the mansion's front door. Tommy glanced toward the study. Charles stood in the doorway, one hand gripping his walking stick so tight his knuckles were white. Their eyes met briefly, and Tommy saw something flash across the old man's face pain, maybe, or regret. But it vanished quickly behind a mask of stern indifference. Without a word, Tommy followed Andrew outside. The cold hit him like a slap. He hadn't grabbed his coat, but he pressed on through the snow. Andrew stood at the edge of the circular driveway, hands stuffed in his pockets, staring at nothing. Hey, Tommy said softly, coming up beside him. You okay? Andrew let out a harsh laugh. Okay? No, I'm not okay. I haven't been okay since I found out what he did to those families in Rochester. He kicked at the snow. He bought up their homes, Tommy. Said he needed the land for a new factory. Promised to relocate them, give them fair compensation. His voice cracked. Then he sold the land to developers for triple the price and left those people with nothing but worthless promises and legal papers they couldn't understand. Tommy stayed quiet, letting Andrew talk. Sometimes silence was the best medicine for a troubled heart. I confronted him about it, Andrew continued. Showed him the evidence? You know what he said? That's business, son. The strong survive, the weak adapt or perish. Like he was quoting some twisted version of Darwin instead of talking about real people's lives. Snow gathered on their shoulders as they stood there. Tommy thought about his own struggles, about the times he'd barely made rent, about the nights he'd lain awake wondering how to make ends meet. Your principles, Tommy said finally, they matter, Andrew, even when they cost you everything. Andrew turned to look at him. How can you be so sure? Because principles aren't just ideas, they're promises we make to ourselves about who we want to be. Tommy brushed snow from his hair. My late wife used to say that a person's character is built in those moments when doing the right thing hurts the most. But what if it's not enough? Andrew's voice was barely a whisper. What if standing up for what's right means losing my only chance to change things from the inside? Tommy thought carefully before answering. Sometimes the biggest changes start small, like ripples in a pond. Maybe those families in Rochester can't be helped now, but the next time something like this comes up, you'll be there to stop it. If he lets me anywhere near the company again, Andrew muttered. He will. Tommy's quiet certainty made Andrew look up. Because deep down, he knows you're right. He just can't admit it yet. Pride's a tough wall to break through, believe me. I know. But it's not unbreakable. They stood in companionable silence for a few moments, watching the snow fall. Andrew's breathing slowly steadied, his shoulders relaxing slightly. You know what's funny? Andrew said eventually. When I left that wallet in your diner, I thought I'd lost everything, but finding someone who'd do the right thing just because it was right? He shook his head. Maybe that's worth more than anything in that wallet. Up in the mansion, unseen by either man, Charles Caldwell stood at his study window. He watched his son and the diner worker talking in the snow, their breaths forming white clouds in the winter air. His expression remained carefully neutral, but his hand, still gripping the walking stick, trembled slightly. The wind howled outside the Caldwell mansion, rattling the windows with its fierce gusts. Snow whirled in thick white curtains, making the enormous house feel smaller and more intimate. Tommy stood at one of the tall windows, watching tree branches sway in the storm. The crystal chandeliers above flickered once, twice, then plunged the room into darkness. Everyone stay calm. Charles's voice carried from somewhere in the shadows. The generator should kick in shortly. Maddie's small hand found Tommy's in the dark. Dad, she whispered. I'm right here, sweetheart. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. The backup lights sputtered to life, casting a softer glow through the house. Harrison, the butler, appeared with several battery-powered lanterns. Sir, Harrison addressed Charles. I believe it would be prudent to use the kitchen for dinner tonight. The main dining room can be quite drafty during storms. Charles nodded, his usual stern expression somewhat softened by the warm lantern light. Yes, that makes sense. Though I haven't eaten in the kitchen since. He stopped himself, a distant look crossing his face. Since Mom was alive, Andrew finished quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken directly to his father since their argument that afternoon. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group until Maddie piped up, I love eating in kitchens. That's where all the good stuff happens. Tommy watched Charles's face carefully, surprised to see the corner of his mouth twitch upward. Well then, Charles said, to the kitchen we go. The kitchen was indeed warmer and more welcoming than the formal dining room. Copper pots hung from a rack overhead, and the industrial-grade stoves gave off a pleasant heat. Harrison and the cook, Mrs. Peterson, worked efficiently to prepare a simple meal of soup and sandwiches. Instead of taking his usual place at the head of a long table, Charles found himself sitting at the round kitchen island, with Tommy to his left and Andrew to his right. Maddie perched on a stool between Tommy and Harrison, her legs swinging slightly. This reminds me of the midnight snacks we used to have, Andrew said, accepting a bowl of steaming soup from Mrs. Peterson. Remember, Dad, when I couldn't sleep and you'd find me down here? Charles stirred his soup thoughtfully. You were always sneaking cookies. Your mother would pretend not to notice. The chocolate chip ones, Andrew smiled. Mrs. Peterson still makes them the same way. The cook beamed, reaching for a covered plate. As a matter of fact, she revealed a batch of fresh cookies, still slightly warm. Maddie's eyes lit up, but she waited politely until Charles nodded his permission before taking one. These are amazing, she declared after her first bite. Almost as good as Dad's special pancakes. Special pancakes? Charles raised an eyebrow at Tommy. Tommy shrugged modestly. Sunday morning tradition, nothing fancy, just add a little vanilla and cinnamon to the batter. Dad makes faces in them with chocolate chips, Maddie added proudly, even when he's super tired from working late. Tommy noticed something shift in Charles's expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight lowering of his usual guard. Working late, Charles repeated. At the diner? Sometimes, Tommy answered, plus the morning paper route and weekend maintenance work at the elementary school. 3 jobs? Andrew looked surprised. Tommy felt his cheeks warm slightly. You do what you have to do for family. The storm chose that moment to rattle the windows particularly hard, making them all jump slightly. Harrison got up to check the generator, and Mrs. Peterson began sharing stories about other memorable storms at the estate. Oh, the blizzard of '92, she chuckled. We all ended up camping in the kitchen for 2 days. Even Mr. Caldwell helped with the dishes. I did no such thing, Charles protested, but his eyes twinkled. I have photographic evidence somewhere, sir. Harrison called from the doorway, returning with a fresh lantern. The conversation flowed easier after that, stories passing back and forth across the kitchen island like warm bread. Tommy shared some of his more amusing diner experiences, and even Charles contributed tales from his early days building the business. I remember this one investor meeting, he said, actually chuckling. I was so nervous, I spilled coffee all over my only good suit right before walking in. What did you do? Maddie asked, completely engrossed. Walked in anyway, Charles replied. Gave my presentation with coffee stains and all. Sometimes you have to push through your embarrassment to get things done. Andrew leaned forward. I never knew that story. Yes, well, Charles cleared his throat. There are probably quite a few stories we haven't shared with each other. The weight of those words hung in the air, but it wasn't heavy with tension like before. Instead, it felt like an opening, a small crack in a long-sealed door. As the evening wore on, Mrs. Peterson served hot chocolate, and Harrison surprised everyone by revealing a talent for card tricks. Maddie convinced him to teach her a simple one, practicing until she could make a card magically appear behind Charles's ear. The old man's laugh was genuine and warm, filling the kitchen like the generator's heat. Tommy watched as father and son exchanged glances across the table, not quite comfortable yet, but no longer arctic. When the main power finally hummed back to life, everyone blinked in the sudden brightness. The spell of their cozy kitchen gathering wasn't broken, though. If anything, they lingered longer over their hot chocolate, no one quite ready to return to their separate corners of the huge house. Finally, Charles stood, stretching slightly. Well, this has been unexpectedly pleasant. He paused, then turned to Tommy. You've raised quite a remarkable daughter. Thank you, sir, Tommy replied. She makes it easy. As they all headed for their respective rooms, Charles did something that made Andrew freeze mid-step. The elderly man reached out and clapped Tommy firmly on the back, a gesture of genuine warmth that seemed to surprise Charles himself. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the mansion's tall windows, but the warmth couldn't reach the chill that had settled back into the house. Tommy stood in the hallway outside Charles's study, hearing the familiar sound of voices rising in anger. He'd been hoping the previous night's peaceful dinner would last, but morning had brought fresh tensions. You've never had to work for anything in your life, Charles's voice boomed through the heavy oak door. How dare you lecture me about responsibility? That's not fair, and you know it. Andrew's voice cracked with emotion. I worked hard in school. At the company I gave everything to prove myself to you. Tommy glanced at Maddie, who was curled up with a book in a window seat down the hall. She looked up, worry creasing her young forehead. He gave her a reassuring smile, though his stomach twisted with concern. Proved yourself? Charles scoffed. By throwing away everything I built? By questioning decisions that kept thousands employed? By refusing to cut corners that put workers at risk? By speaking up about safety violations you wanted buried? Andrew's footsteps paced the study floor. That's exactly what real responsibility looks like. Tommy heard something heavy hit a desk, probably Charles's fist. You naive boy, the world isn't your college ethics class. Sometimes hard choices. No, Andrew's voice rose sharply. That's just an excuse. Mom would have never. Don't you dare bring her into this, Charles roared, but his voice suddenly faltered. A heavy thud followed. Dad? Andrew's anger transformed instantly to fear. Dad! Tommy was through the door before Andrew finished calling out. Charles lay crumpled beside his desk, one hand clutching his chest, his face ashen. Andrew stood frozen, eyes wide with horror. Tommy dropped to his knees beside Charles, years of first aid training kicking in. "Mr. Caldwell? Can you hear me?" He pressed 2 fingers to Charles's neck, finding a rapid, irregular pulse. "Jenkins!" Tommy shouted for the butler. "Call 911 now!" The butler appeared in seconds, phone already in hand. Tommy heard him giving clear directions to the estate as he focused on Charles. "He's breathing, but it's shallow," Tommy reported, quickly loosening Charles's tie and collar. "Andrew, help me lay him flat." Andrew snapped out of his shock and moved to help. His hands trembled as they eased Charles onto his back. "Dad! Please, Dad!" Charles's eyes fluttered, a weak groan escaping his lips. Tommy kept monitoring his pulse while checking his breathing. "Stay with us, Mr. Caldwell. Help is coming." "What's happening?" Maddie's small voice came from the doorway. "Sweetie, I need you to go with Mr. Jenkins," Tommy said firmly but gently. "He'll show you where to wait for the ambulance and guide them in when they arrive." Jenkins smoothly took Maddie's hand, leading her away as she cast worried glances over her shoulder. Charles's breathing grew more labored. Tommy recognized the signs of a heart attack from his first aid courses. "Andrew, take his hand. Talk to him. Keep him conscious if you can." Andrew gripped his father's hand, his voice barely a whisper. "Dad, I'm here. I'm so sorry. Please hold on." Charles's eyes found Andrew's face, confusion, and fear mixing with something softer, something that looked like regret. He tried to speak, but could only manage a weak squeeze of Andrew's hand. Tommy heard sirens in the distance, growing closer. "They're almost here, Mr. Caldwell. Just keep breathing." The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. Paramedics rushed in with equipment and a stretcher. Tommy moved back, giving them space to work while keeping a steadying hand on Andrew's shoulder. He watched them attach monitors, start an IV, and place an oxygen mask over Charles's face. "Probable myocardial infarction," one paramedic reported into a radio. "Patient is conscious but unstable. Beginning transport." "I'm riding with him," Andrew said, his voice shaking but determined. The paramedics nodded, efficiently transferring Charles onto the stretcher. As they wheeled him out, Charles's hand reached weakly toward his son. Andrew caught it, holding on until they reached the ambulance. Tommy stood in the study doorway, watching the emergency vehicles pull away, their lights flashing against the afternoon shadows. Andrew sat in the ambulance, pale and trembling, looking younger than his years as he held his father's hand. The same hand that had struck the desk in anger minutes before now clung to life itself. Behind him, Tommy heard Maddie's small footsteps approach. She slipped her hand into his, and he squeezed it gently, grateful for her quiet strength. "Is Mr. Charles going to be okay?" she asked softly. Tommy looked down at his daughter, seeing the same worry in her eyes that he'd seen too many times when her mother was sick. "The doctors will do everything they can, sweetie. Sometimes." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes it takes something scary to help people remember what's really important." Jenkins appeared beside them, his usual formal demeanor softened by concern. "I've called ahead to the hospital. They're expecting Mr. Caldwell. Shall I prepare the car to follow them?" Tommy nodded, giving Maddie's hand another squeeze. "Yes, please. Andrew shouldn't be alone right now." As Jenkins moved to make arrangements, Tommy watched the ambulance disappear through the estate's gates. The argument's angry words still echoed in his mind, now hollow in the face of what really mattered. He thought of Andrew, trembling and afraid, all his righteous anger transformed in an instant to desperate love and regret. Sometimes life's hardest lessons came wrapped in moments of crisis. Tommy just hoped this one wouldn't come at too high a price. The fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow that made everyone look sickly. Tommy sat in one of the stiff plastic chairs, his shoulders hunched from hours of waiting. Beside him, Maddie had finally dozed off, her head resting against his arm. Across from them, Andrew paced back and forth, his expensive shoes clicking against the linoleum floor. "Maybe you should sit down," Tommy suggested quietly, not wanting to wake Maddie. "You've been walking for hours." Andrew ran his fingers through his disheveled hair. His tie hung loose around his neck, and his normally pristine shirt was wrinkled. "I can't," he muttered. "If I sit, I'll think too much, and if I think too much—" He trailed off, his voice catching. The waiting room was nearly empty at this late hour. A nurse passed by with a clipboard, her shoes squeaking. The coffee from the vending machine had gone cold in Tommy's hands, but he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. It gave him something to hold on to. Finally, a doctor in blue scrubs approached them, "Mr. Caldwell?" she called out. Andrew froze mid-step. "Yes? How is he?" The doctor's face softened. "Your father is stable. The heart attack was severe, but we were able to intervene in time. He's weak, but he's responding well to treatment." Tommy felt a wave of relief wash over him. He gently shifted Maddie's head to rest against the chair as he stood up. "Can I see him?" Andrew asked, his voice small, almost childlike. "He's heavily sedated right now," the doctor explained. "It would be best to wait until morning. He needs complete rest." Andrew nodded, looking lost. Just then, the elevator doors opened with a soft ding. A tall man in an expensive suit stepped out, carrying a leather briefcase. His presence seemed to fill the waiting room. "Mr. Harrison," Andrew said, recognizing his father's lawyer. "What are you doing here?" The lawyer's expression was grave. "Andrew, I came as soon as I heard." He glanced at Tommy and Maddie, then back to Andrew. "Perhaps we should speak privately?" Andrew shook his head. "Whatever it is, you can say it here. Tommy's a friend." Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. "Very well. Your father contacted me last week to make some changes to his will. Given the circumstances, I feel obligated to inform you of the contents." The air seemed to grow thicker. Tommy watched as Andrew's shoulders tensed. "He's removed you as heir to the Caldwell estate and business holdings," Harrison continued, his voice professionally detached. "The entire inheritance will go to a board of trustees selected by your father." Andrew didn't move. He stood perfectly still, like a statue. Tommy wanted to reach out, to say something, but no words seemed adequate. "When?" Andrew finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "When did he do this?" "The papers were signed 3 days ago," Harrison replied. "Just before your arrival." Andrew let out a bitter laugh that echoed in the quiet waiting room. "Of course. He knew I was coming. He knew, and he made sure to." He turned away, pressing his fist against the wall. Tommy stood up slowly. "Andrew, don't," Andrew cut him off. "Just don't." He took a deep breath, his shoulders shaking. "All this time, I thought if I could just explain, if he could understand why I couldn't do what he wanted." "But he never intended to listen, did he?" Harrison shifted uncomfortably. "I should mention that your father was quite adamant about his decision." "I'm sure he was," Andrew said flatly. He turned back around, his eyes red, rimmed but dry. "Thank you for telling me, Mr. Harrison. You can go now." The lawyer hesitated, then nodded. "I'll be in touch if there are any changes to his condition." He walked back to the elevator, his footsteps echoing in the silent room. Tommy watched as Andrew sank into a chair, all the fight draining out of him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking each heavy second. "I failed," Andrew finally said, staring at his hands. "I thought I could make him understand. I thought if I stood up for what was right, he'd eventually see." He looked up at Tommy, his eyes full of pain. "But I just made everything worse." "That's not true," Tommy said firmly. "Standing up for what you believe in isn't failure." "Isn't it? Look where we are. He's in there fighting for his life, and the last thing we did was argue. I pushed him too hard, and now—" Andrew's voice cracked. Maddie stirred in her sleep, murmuring something inaudible. Tommy tucked his jacket more securely around her. "I'm leaving in the morning," Andrew announced suddenly. Tommy's head snapped up. "What? You can't leave now." "I have to." Andrew stood up, straightening his tie with trembling fingers. "There's nothing left for me here. He made that very clear with the will. I'll just make things worse if I stay." "Andrew, he's your father. He just had a heart attack. Whatever's happened between you—" "Is exactly why I need to go," Andrew interrupted. "Every time I try to fix things, I break them more. I'm not what he wants me to be, and I never will be." He looked around the waiting room, at the stark walls and uncomfortable chairs. "I should have known better than to think I could change anything." Tommy wanted to argue, to tell Andrew he was making a mistake, but he recognized the look in the younger man's eyes. It was the same look he'd seen in his own mirror in the days after his wife died, the look of someone who couldn't bear any more pain. "Where will you go?" Tommy asked softly. Andrew shrugged, attempting a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've got some friends out west. Maybe it's time I took them up on their offer to visit." He picked up his coat from the chair. "I'll have a car come for you and Maddie in the morning. Take you home." "Andrew." "Thank you, Tommy." Andrew cut him off. "For everything. For being honest when you found my wallet. For coming here with me. He glanced at Maddie's sleeping form. for showing me what a real family looks like." Before Tommy could respond, Andrew turned and walked away, his footsteps fading down the hospital corridor. Tommy watched him go, feeling the weight of unspoken words in the air. Outside the window, the first light of dawn was beginning to break over the horizon, but inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed on, unchanged and unforgiving. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 10 as Maddie padded down the dimly lit corridor of the Caldwell estate. She couldn't sleep, not with all the worry hanging in the air like the heavy snow clouds outside. Her sock-covered feet made soft shuffling sounds against the polished hardwood floors. Through a partly open door, she saw Andrew. He was in his old bedroom, mechanically folding expensive shirts and placing them in a leather suitcase. His movements were stiff, like he was trying to hold himself together. "Are you leaving?" Maddie's small voice made Andrew jump. He turned, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, kiddo, you should be in bed." Maddie stepped into the room, her blue pajamas, with little stars catching the warm light from the bedside lamp. "I couldn't sleep. Too many thoughts in my head." She walked over to his suitcase and picked up one of his folded ties, running her fingers over the silk. "Dad says that happens sometimes when your heart is too full." Andrew sat heavily on the edge of his bed. "Your dad's a wise man." "He is." Maddie put the tie down carefully. "He also says you don't walk away when someone needs you most." Andrew's hand stilled on the shirt he was folding. "Did he send you to tell me that?" "No." Maddie shook her head, her brown ponytail swishing. "He's downstairs making hot chocolate. He always makes it when things are hard. But I remembered him saying it when Miss Peterson next door got sick, and he went to help her even though he was really tired from work." She climbed onto the bed next to Andrew, her legs dangling over the edge. "He said sometimes doing the right thing is like eating vegetables. You don't always want to, but it makes you stronger." A chuckle escaped Andrew despite himself. "Your dad has quite a way with words." "Your dad needs you," Maddie said simply, looking up at him with earnest eyes. "Even if he's being grumpy about it, like when I had the flu and got cranky. But Dad knew I needed him anyway." Andrew ran a hand through his hair, messing it up. "It's complicated, Maddie. Sometimes trying to help just makes things worse." "That's what I said when I spilled juice trying to pour it myself," Maddie replied. "But Dad said mistakes don't mean we should stop trying. They just mean we need to try differently." She hopped off the bed and went to Andrew's dresser, where several framed photos sat. She picked up one showing a much younger Andrew sitting on Charles's shoulders at what looked like a baseball game. Both were smiling. "Was this a happy day?" she asked, bringing the photo to Andrew. He took it, his fingers trembling slightly. Yeah, it was. Cubs versus Cardinals. Dad bought me too many hot dogs and taught me how to keep score." His voice grew thick. "I'd forgotten about this." "See?" Maddie pointed at the picture. "That's still your dad in there. Just like in the kitchen yesterday when he laughed at your story about the frog in the pool. He's just got lots of grumpy stuff covering up the happy stuff." In the hallway, Tommy stood quietly against the wall, listening. He'd come up to check on Maddie when he found her bed empty. Now he watched through the crack in the door as his daughter did what she did best, cut through all the grown-up complications with simple truth. Andrew set the photo on the bed and pulled out his wallet, removing an old, creased photo. "This is the last picture I have of my mom," he said softly. "She always said Dad was like a coconut, hard on the outside but soft inside if you could just crack through." "Is that why you're mad at him? Because he got too hard to crack?" Andrew's breath caught. "Maybe, or maybe I got tired of trying." Maddie leaned against his arm. "When I get really mad at something hard, Dad makes me count to 10 and think about what I'm really feeling. He says usually when we're mad, we're actually scared or sad about something else." Tommy watched Andrew's shoulders shake slightly. His daughter had done it again, seen right to the heart of things with that pure clarity children sometimes have. "What if?" Andrew's voice was barely a whisper. "What if I stay and nothing changes? What if he never understands?" "Then at least you'll know you tried your very best," Maddie said firmly. "That's what matters most. Dad says so." "Your dad says a lot of smart things." "Yep," Maddie grinned. "And he makes really good hot chocolate. Want some? It helps with thinking." Andrew looked at his half-packed suitcase, then at the photo of the baseball game. Finally, he looked at Maddie's hopeful face. "You know what? I think I could use some hot chocolate right about now." "Does that mean you're staying?" Andrew took a deep breath. "I don't know yet, but I'll think about it over hot chocolate." "Deal?" "Deal!" Maddie jumped up and headed for the door. I'll tell Dad to make extra marshmallows. As Maddie darted past him in the hallway, Tommy quickly stepped back into the shadows. He watched her disappear down the stairs, then glanced back at Andrew's room. The young man was still sitting on the bed, holding the baseball photo, his expression troubled but softening. Tommy nodded to himself. His daughter had given Andrew something to think about, but maybe there was one more thing he could do to help bridge this gap between father and son. He turned quietly, his mind already forming a plan. The morning sunlight filtered through the hospital's thin curtains, casting long shadows across the sterile hallway where Tommy and Andrew stood. Andrew's shoulders were tense, his hands shoved deep in his pockets as he stared at the closed door to his father's room. "I can't do this," Andrew muttered, taking a step back. After everything that happened, Tommy placed a gentle hand on Andrew's shoulder. Sometimes the hardest things are the most important ones. He glanced down at Maddie, who clutched her drawing carefully in both hands. "We're here with you." The hospital's antiseptic smell hung in the air as nurses walked past, their shoes squeaking against the polished floor. Machines beeped steadily from nearby rooms, a constant reminder of where they were. "What if he doesn't want to see me?" Andrew's voice was barely above a whisper. "Then at least you'll know you tried," Tommy said. "That's worth something." Maddie reached up and took Andrew's hand, her small fingers wrapping around his. "Don't be scared. Dad says being brave means doing something even when you're scared." A ghost of a smile crossed Andrew's face. He squeezed Maddie's hand and took a deep breath. "Okay, let's do this." They entered the room quietly. Charles lay propped up against white pillows, looking smaller somehow in the hospital bed. Various monitors tracked his vital signs, their soft beeping a steady rhythm in the quiet room. His eyes were closed, but they fluttered open as the door clicked shut. "Andrew?" Charles's voice was rough, barely above a whisper. Andrew stood frozen just inside the doorway. Tommy gave him a gentle nudge forward. "Hi, Dad," Andrew managed, his voice tight with emotion. Charles's eyes moved from Andrew to Tommy, then to Maddie. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or relief. Tommy stepped forward, pulling up chairs for them all. "Mr. Caldwell, we wanted to come see how you're doing." "Why?" The question was direct, but lacking the usual sharp edge to his voice. Tommy sat down, keeping his voice calm and steady. "Because that's what people do when they care about each other. They show up, even when it's hard." He glanced at Andrew, who remained standing, rigid with tension. "Especially when it's hard." Charles's gaze fixed on Tommy. "You're a simple man, Mr. Hayes, a waiter in a small-town diner. What could you possibly understand about complicated family matters?" "I understand plenty about family," Tommy replied, his voice gentle but firm. "I understand that pride can build walls so high we forget how to climb over them. I understand that sometimes the richest people are the ones who have nothing but their word and their integrity." Andrew shifted uncomfortably, but Tommy continued. "When I found your son's wallet, I could have kept that money. My rent was late, Maddie needs braces, and my car's falling apart. But I didn't, because some things are worth more than money." "Like what?" Charles asked, his voice barely audible. "Like being able to look my daughter in the eye and know I'm teaching her right from wrong. Like being able to sleep at night knowing I haven't betrayed my own values." Tommy leaned forward slightly. "Your son made the same choice, Mr. Caldwell. He chose his integrity over money. Isn't that something to be proud of?" Charles's eyes moved to Andrew, who had finally sunk into one of the chairs. The machines continued their steady beeping in the silence that followed. "I brought something," Maddie said suddenly, stepping forward with her drawing. She held it out to Charles with both hands. "It's the picture I drew at your house. See? That's all of us together." Charles's weathered hands trembled slightly as he took the paper. In Maddie's childish style, stick figures stood holding hands in front of the grand estate. One tall figure with gray hair, another in a suit, a man in regular clothes, and a small figure with pigtails. Above them, she had written in careful letters, "Our family." "You kept this?" Charles asked, his voice rougher than before. "I made it better," Maddie explained. "I added more flowers and a rainbow. Dad says rainbows come after storms, and they make everything prettier." A sound escaped Charles that might have been a laugh or a sob. His fingers traced the crayon lines carefully. "Andrew," Tommy said softly, "maybe you'd like to tell your father what you told me at the gala, about why you couldn't go along with those business deals." Andrew swallowed hard. I couldn't do it because it would have hurt people. Regular folks who work hard and trust us to do right by them, like Tommy." like his customers at the diner. He took a shaky breath. I wanted you to be proud of me, Dad, but I needed to be proud of myself too. The honest truth, Tommy added, is that sometimes the strongest thing we can do is admit when we're wrong, and the bravest thing we can do is forgive. Charles's hand moved across the blanket, reaching out slowly. Tommy took it, feeling the weak grip of the older man's fingers. End of scene as per instructions, with Charles's hand gripping Tommy's weakly. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the silence in the sterile hospital room. Charles Caldwell lay propped up against white pillows, looking smaller and more vulnerable than Tommy had ever seen him. The morning sun filtered through thin curtains, casting gentle shadows across the room. Why? Charles's voice was weak but clear. Why did you return that wallet to my son? Tommy shifted in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside the bed. Andrew stood by the window, his shoulders tense as he waited for the answer. Maddie sat cross-legged on the floor, working on another drawing. $5,000, Charles continued. That's more than you make in 2 months at that diner, isn't it? Tommy nodded slowly. Yes, sir, it is. So why? And don't give me some rehearsed answer about doing the right thing. I want the truth. Charles's eyes, though tired, fixed on Tommy with the same intensity they'd shown at the estate. Tommy took a deep breath, glancing at Maddie. She looked up from her drawing, giving him a small smile that reminded him so much of her mother. The truth is, Mr. Caldwell, I did think about keeping it. Tommy's voice was quiet but steady. My rent was late. Maddie needs braces. The car's been making this weird noise that's probably going to cost more than I have. For about 10 minutes, I sat there thinking how that money could solve all those problems. Charles watched him intently, waiting. But then I thought about Maddie. Tommy reached over and gently touched his daughter's shoulder. Every day, I tell her that character matters more than money. That doing the right thing isn't just for when it's easy, it's for when it's hard. That your word and your integrity are things no one can take from you unless you give them away. Tommy leaned forward in his chair. If I'd kept that money, maybe we'd have been more comfortable for a while. But how could I look her in the eye and tell her to be honest when I couldn't do it myself? What kind of example would that set? The room fell silent, except for the steady beeping. Andrew had turned from the window, his eyes glistening. My late wife, Sarah, Tommy continued, his voice softening. She always said that wealth isn't what you have in your wallet. It's what you teach your children. When I found that wallet, I thought about what she would say. And I knew that no amount of money was worth teaching Maddie that it's okay to compromise who you are when things get tough. Charles's expression changed, something shifting behind his eyes. He looked at Andrew, then back at Tommy. You know, Charles said, his voice rougher than before, I used to tell Andrew similar things when he was young. Somewhere along the way, I forgot my own lessons. He coughed, and Andrew quickly moved to help him sip some water. I started out with nothing, Charles continued after catching his breath. Worked in a factory, just like I told you. Back then, I swore I'd never forget where I came from. But success can make you hard, make you forget what matters. Maddie stood up, walking to Charles's bedside with her drawing. I drew you something new, she said, holding out the paper. It's all of us having dinner by the fire like it's your house. Charles took the drawing with trembling hand. In the child's simple style, stick figures sat around a table, one with gray hair, one with a tie, one with a chef's hat, and a small one with pigtails. They all had big smiles. You made me smile in this picture, Charles said softly. Because you did smile, Maddie replied matter-of-factly. When you told stories about when you were young, you looked happy. Charles stared at the drawing for a long moment. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. I've been wrong about so many things, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Andrew, come here. Andrew approached the bed hesitantly. Charles reached for his son's hand. You were right to stand up for your principles. I was too proud, too set in my ways to see it. Charles squeezed Andrew's hand. I've spent so many years building an empire that I forgot what it was supposed to be for. Tommy started to stand, feeling like he should give them privacy, but Charles's voice stopped him. Stay, please, both of you. He looked at Tommy and Maddie. You've shown me something I needed to see. He turned back to Andrew. Your mother would be proud of the man you've become. I should have told you that long ago. Andrew's shoulders shook slightly as he tried to hold back tears. Dad. No, let me finish. Charles struggled to sit up straighter. I need to make this right. Would someone please call Jenkins? My lawyer. He added for Tommy's benefit. It's time to fix my mistakes. Tommy reached for the room's phone, but Charles stopped him with a raised hand. "Before we do that," Charles said, "I want you to know something, Tommy Hayes. You came here to help my son, but you've helped me too. Sometimes it takes an outsider to hold up a mirror and show us who we've become." He paused, looking at Maddie's drawing again. "Sometimes it takes a child to remind us who we used to be." The room fell quiet again, but this time the silence felt different, lighter somehow, as if a great weight had lifted. Tommy finally reached for the phone to call the lawyer, watching as Andrew pulled his chair closer to his father's bed. Maddie climbed carefully onto the foot of the bed, already starting another drawing. Through the window, the morning sun grew stronger, warming the room with golden light. The heart monitor kept its steady rhythm, marking time as the family began to heal. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the hospital room window as Charles's lawyer, Mr. Peterson, arrived with his briefcase. The elderly attorney's wire-rimmed glasses caught the light as he pulled up a chair beside Charles's bed. Tommy stood near the door, feeling like he should leave, but Charles's weak voice called him back. "Stay, Hayes. You too, Andrew. This concerns you both." Andrew moved closer to his father's bed, his shoulders tense. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the silence as Mr. Peterson pulled out several documents. "I want to make changes," Charles said, his voice stronger than it had been all day. "Substantial ones." Mr. Peterson nodded, pulling out a pen. "I assumed as much when you called, Charles. I've brought the necessary forms." Tommy watched as Charles struggled to sit up straighter in his hospital bed. Andrew instinctively reached out to adjust his father's pillows, and for the first time, Charles didn't wave away his son's help. "The will as it stands is wrong," Charles said plainly. "I want Andrew reinstated as my heir." Andrew's breath caught audibly. Tommy saw his friend's hands tremble slightly as he gripped the bed rail. "Father, you don't have to," Andrew started, but Charles cut him off with a raised hand. "Let me finish." Charles turned to Mr. Peterson. "But I want conditions attached. A significant portion, let's say 40% of the estate's value, will establish a foundation." Mr. Peterson's pen scratched across his legal pad. "What kind of foundation did you have in mind?" Charles's eyes found Tommy's. "One that helps working families. People trying to do right by their children while struggling to make ends meet. Single parents, small business owners. People like." He gestured toward Tommy. "People like him." Tommy felt his chest tighten with emotion. He thought of all the times he'd stretched a paycheck to cover Maddie's school supplies, or the nights he'd stayed up worrying about bills. "And I want Tommy Hayes to run it," Charles continued. "As its first director." Tommy's mouth fell open. "Mr. Caldwell, the second don't know anything about running a foundation." "You know what matters," Charles replied firmly. "You know about integrity, about doing what's right even when it's hard, about raising a child with good values." His eyes shifted to Andrew. "Things I should have taught my own son better." Andrew moved closer to his father's bed. "Dad, you taught me plenty. I just chose a different way to apply those lessons." Charles reached for Andrew's hand, surprising everyone in the room. "Maybe your way wasn't so wrong after all." Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. "Charles, shall I draft the amendments now? We'll need witnesses." "Yes." Charles nodded. "And add one more thing. The foundation's board must always include at least one current small business owner and one single parent, people who understand the challenges firsthand." Tommy watched in amazement as Mr. Peterson drafted the changes, his neat handwriting filling page after page. A nurse and another doctor were called in to serve as witnesses. Throughout it all, Charles kept hold of Andrew's hand. When it came time to sign, Charles's hand shook, but his signature was clear. Andrew stood witness, his own signature steady beneath his father's. Tommy found himself signing as well, his name looking strange and ordinary next to the elaborate Caldwell signatures. "It's done," Mr. Peterson said, organizing the papers. "I'll file these first thing in the morning." Charles settled back against his pillows, looking exhausted but peaceful. "Andrew," he said softly, "I'm sorry it took me so long to understand." Andrew's eyes glistened. "I'm sorry too, Dad, for some of the things I said." "You were right about some of them," Charles admitted. "The company needs to change. Maybe this foundation is a start." Tommy felt like he was witnessing something sacred, a healing that had been years in the making. He began to step away, but Charles called out again. "Hayes." "Yes, sir?" "Thank you for bringing my son back to me." Charles's eyes were growing heavy with fatigue. "And for showing me what real success looks like." Tommy nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He thought of Maddie, Of all the times he'd wondered if he was doing enough for her, maybe being rich wasn't about money at all. Charles's eyes drifted closed, his breathing evening out. The faintest smile played at the corners of his mouth as he fell asleep. Andrew carefully released his father's hand and stepped back, wiping his eyes quickly with his sleeve. Mr. Peterson packed his briefcase quietly and nodded to them both before slipping out of the room. Tommy and Andrew stood in the peaceful quiet, watching Charles sleep, the afternoon sun warming the room with golden light. The heart monitor continued its steady rhythm, like a metronome counting out moments of grace. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the recently polished counter. Tommy adjusted his familiar blue apron, feeling both strange and comforted to be back in his routine after everything that had happened at the Caldwell estate. The bell above the door chimed its cheerful welcome as the first customers of the day wandered in. "Welcome to Hay's Diner," Tommy called out, the words flowing naturally despite his week-long absence. The regular morning crowd filtered in: factory workers grabbing coffee before their shift, retired couples sharing breakfast, and hurried professionals stopping for a quick bite. "There he is!" Old Joe, a retired mechanic who'd been coming to the diner for 20 years, lifted his coffee mug in greeting. "Our local celebrity." Tommy felt his cheeks warm. The local paper had run a story about the Caldwell Foundation yesterday, complete with a photo of him standing next to Charles and Andrew. He tried to keep things quiet, but news traveled fast in a small town. "Just doing my job, Joe," Tommy replied, sliding a fresh pot of coffee onto the warmer. "Doing your job?" Martha Wilson, who ran the flower shop down the street, leaned across the counter. "Tommy Hayes, you're going to be running a multi-million-dollar foundation. That's not just doing your job." Tommy focused on wiping down the counter, uncomfortable with the attention. "The foundation's going to help working families. That's what matters." The bell chimed again, and Tommy looked up to see Maddie bouncing through the door, her backpack swinging. Mrs. Henderson, their neighbor who drove Maddie to school, waved from outside before pulling away. "Dad!" Maddie raced to the counter, her face glowing. "Jenny showed everyone the newspaper at school. My teacher said we should be really proud of you." Tommy reached across the counter to smooth down her hair. "How about you help me with the menus while you do your homework?" "Can I tell people about the foundation?" Maddie asked, already pulling out her math workbook. "About how Mr. Caldwell changed his mind because of your speech about honesty?" "Let's focus on these fractions first," Tommy suggested gently, but he couldn't help smiling at her enthusiasm. Throughout the morning, more customers arrived, each with their own congratulations and questions. Tommy answered them as best he could while keeping the coffee flowing and the orders moving. He noticed Gina, his coworker, showing customers the newspaper article she'd pinned to the bulletin board. "You should frame it," she insisted during a quiet moment. "It's not every day one of our own becomes something big." Tommy shook his head. "I'm still just a diner worker, Gina. The foundation's going to need someone who knows what they're doing." "That's exactly why it should be you," she replied, pointing her pen at him. "You know what real people need. You've lived it." By lunchtime, the diner was busier than usual. Tommy suspected some people had come just to see him, though most were kind enough not to make a big deal about it. He kept working, taking orders, refilling coffee cups, and making sure everyone felt welcome, just as he always had. Maddie sat at her usual spot at the counter, alternating between homework and drawing in her sketchbook. She'd already filled several pages with ideas for the foundation's logo, each featuring helping hands and bright colors. "What about this one, Dad?" She held up her latest design, where stick figures formed a circle around a heart. "It shows how everyone's connected." "That's beautiful, sweetie," Tommy said, meaning it. He'd noticed how she'd made some figures larger and some smaller, like adults protecting children. The thought reminded him of Charles Caldwell's face when Maddie had given him her drawing in the hospital. Around 2 o'clock, when the lunch rush had settled, Tommy's phone buzzed in his pocket. The caller ID showed Andrew's name. "Hold down the fort for a minute?" he asked Gina, who shooed him toward the break room with a knowing smile. "Tommy," Andrew's voice crackled with excitement, "I've been working on plans for our first project. How would you feel about starting right there in your neighborhood?" Tommy leaned against the wall, listening as Andrew outlined his idea. The foundation would begin by offering small business loans and educational grants to local families. The diner would serve as a community hub where people could learn about available resources. "We could help people like you helped me," Andrew said. "Give them a chance when they need it most." Tommy thought about all the families he knew who were struggling, single parents working multiple jobs, elderly folks choosing between medicine and food, young people unable to afford college. That sounds perfect, Andrew. I'll have the paperwork ready next week. Dad's already approved it. He's doing better, by the way. The doctors say he might come home soon. After hanging up, Tommy stood in the break room for a moment, taking it all in. Through the door, he could hear the familiar sounds of the diner. Clinking plates, quiet conversations, Maddie's laugh as she chatted with customers. These were the sounds of community, of real life, happening one cup of coffee at a time. When he returned to the counter, Maddie was showing her foundation logos to a group of regulars who were offering enthusiastic feedback. She'd added new details to each design, incorporating suggestions from customers throughout the day. "Dad," she called out, "Mr. Peterson thinks we should add a rainbow to show hope. Can I tell Andrew when I see him next time?" Tommy watched his daughter's face light up as she described her ideas, saw the way the customers leaned in to listen, noticed how even the usual grumpy faces had softened into smiles. This was what the foundation could do: bring people together, give them hope, make them feel heard. "Was that Andrew on the phone?" Maddie asked as Tommy refilled coffee cups along the counter. "It was," he replied, catching the excited whispers that rippled through the diner at the mention of Andrew's name. "He has some ideas for the foundation's first project." The bell above the door chimed again, and Tommy looked up, ready to welcome another customer into their small but growing community. The sunshine streamed through the windows, warming the familiar space that had started it all, where a lost wallet had led to found friendship and unexpected chances for change. The Saturday morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Tommy wiped down the counter for the third time, more out of habit than necessity. The breakfast rush had ended, leaving only the familiar hum of the refrigerator and the gentle clink of coffee cups from the few regular customers scattered around the booths. The bell above the door chimed, and Tommy looked up to see Andrew stepping in, clutching a leather briefcase and several thick manila folders under his arm. His suit was crisp as always, but there was something different about him now, a lightness in his step, a brightness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Morning, Tommy," Andrew called out, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "Coffee, black, and maybe one of those blueberry muffins Maddie's always talking about?" Tommy poured the coffee with a practiced hand. "Coming right up. You're here early for a Saturday." He placed a freshly baked muffin on a plate and slid it across the counter. Andrew took a sip of coffee and carefully arranged the folders in front of him. "I wanted to catch you before the lunch crowd. The foundation's board met yesterday, and we've approved our first project." His fingers drummed excitedly on the counter. "I think you're going to like this." Tommy leaned forward, curious. "That was fast. Your father's only been home from the hospital for 2 weeks. When you know something's right, why wait?" Andrew opened the first folder and spread out several architectural drawings. "See this? It's the empty lot behind the diner." Tommy nodded, studying the drawings. The lot had been vacant for years, collecting weeds and the occasional piece of wind-blown trash. He'd always meant to do something with it, but there had never been enough money. "Look at what it could be," Andrew said, pulling out more renderings. The drawing showed a transformed space, raised garden beds bursting with vegetables, comfortable seating areas protected by pergolas, and a modern outdoor kitchen setup. "I don't understand," Tommy said, his voice barely above a whisper. Andrew's eyes lit up as he explained. "It's going to be a community garden and free meal area. The garden will supply fresh produce for the diner and for families in need. We'll set up cooking classes, teach people about nutrition, and create a space where anyone can come for a hot meal, no questions asked." Tommy's hands gripped the edge of the counter. That's a lot to take in." "There's more," Andrew continued, opening another folder. "We want to renovate the diner's kitchen, expand it to handle the increased capacity. New equipment, better storage, everything you need to make this work." A regular customer at the end of the counter looked up from his newspaper, interested in the conversation. Tommy noticed others watching too, their curiosity piqued by the drawings and Andrew's animated gestures. "The foundation will cover all the construction costs and the first 3 years of operating expenses," Andrew explained. "After that, we've developed a self-sustaining model using a mix of community support and ongoing foundation grants." Tommy pulled up a stool, his legs suddenly feeling weak. "Why here?" he asked. "Why my diner?" Andrew set down his coffee cup and looked Tommy straight in the eye. "Because this place, and you, showed me what community really means. That wallet you found? It wasn't just about the money. It was about integrity, about doing the right thing even when it's hard. That's what we want to build on. The door chimed again, and Maddie burst in, still wearing her soccer uniform from morning practice. She stopped short when she saw the drawings spread across the counter. "What's all this?" she asked, peering at the renderings. Andrew smiled and patted the stool next to him. "Come see what we're planning for your dad's diner." Maddie climbed up and studied the drawings intently. Her eyes grew wide as Andrew explained each feature: the garden beds, the teaching kitchen, the community gathering spaces. "Can I help with the garden?" she asked eagerly. "We're learning about vegetables in science class." "You'll be our chief gardening consultant," Andrew assured her with a wink. Tommy watched his daughter's excitement, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. He thought about all the families struggling to make ends meet, just like he had been. He thought about the elderly customers who came in as much for conversation as for food. This project could change lives. "When do we start?" Tommy asked, his voice thick with emotion. Andrew pulled out a contract from the last folder. "We can break ground next month if you're ready. The foundation's contractors are already lined up." He slid the papers across the counter. "All we need is your signature." Tommy picked up the contract, reading through the details carefully. Everything was there: the renovation plans, the operating agreements, the funding commitments. It was more generous than he could have imagined. "You know," Tommy said slowly, "when I found that wallet, I never expected anything like this. I just did what seemed right." Andrew nodded. "That's exactly why this needs to happen here. My father taught me about business strategy and corporate empires. But you, Tommy, you taught me about the kind of success that really matters." The morning sun had climbed higher now, filling the diner with golden light. The regular customers had abandoned any pretense of not listening, their faces showing genuine joy for their friend and neighbor. Tommy picked up a pen, his hand steady despite the emotion he felt. He looked at Maddie, who was practically bouncing with excitement, then at Andrew, who had become so much more than just a customer or even a friend. "Ready to change some lives?" Andrew asked, extending his hand across the counter. Tommy gripped Andrew's hand firmly, the contract signed and waiting between them. "Ready as I'll ever be." Their handshake sealed more than just a business deal. It was a promise to the community, a bridge between two worlds, and the beginning of something extraordinary. The spring morning dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for the community garden groundbreaking. Tommy stood at the edge of what used to be the diner's empty backlot, amazed at how many people had shown up. At least 50 volunteers milled around, carrying shovels, wheelbarrows, and boxes of seedlings. Andrew moved through the crowd in old jeans and a t-shirt, a far cry from the suit he'd worn when Tommy first met him. He carried a clipboard and directed people with the same confidence he probably used in corporate boardrooms, but his smile was genuine and relaxed. "Dad, look!" Maddie tugged at Tommy's sleeve. She pointed to the neat rows of wooden planters that volunteers had assembled earlier that morning. "Can I really plant the first one?" "That's the plan, sweetheart." Tommy squeezed her shoulder. "Andrew saved a special spot just for you." The transformation of the lot was already remarkable. Fresh soil had been brought in, replacing the cracked asphalt. Newly built benches lined the edges, and an arbor marked what would become the garden's entrance. Someone had even painted a cheerful mural of vegetables and flowers on the diner's back wall. "All right, everyone," Andrew called out, climbing onto one of the empty planters. The crowd quieted. "First, I want to thank you all for coming out today. This garden isn't just about growing food. It's about growing community." Tommy watched as people nodded in agreement. He recognized most of them: the librarian who always ordered Earl Grey tea, the mechanic who fixed his car at a discount, the retired teacher who gave Maddie extra help with math. They were all here, ready to work together. "Before we start planting," Andrew continued, "we received something special this morning." He pulled an envelope from his pocket and handed it to Tommy. "Would you do the honors?" Tommy recognized Charles's elegant handwriting on the envelope. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. The old man had been released from the hospital but was still recovering at home. Tommy cleared his throat and began to read. "Dear friends, though I cannot be there today, my heart is with you all. For too many years, I measured success only in dollars and cents. Thanks to the wisdom of a diner owner and his remarkable daughter, I have learned that true wealth lies in the bonds we forge with others. This garden represents everything I should have valued all along: hard work, community, and helping those in need. May it flourish and remind us that the smallest acts of kindness can grow into something extraordinary. With gratitude, Charles Caldwell. A respectful silence fell over the crowd. Tommy folded the letter carefully, thinking about how far they'd all come since that winter morning when Andrew first walked into the diner. "And now," Andrew announced, "the moment we've been waiting for. Maddie Hayes, would you please do us the honor of planting our first seedling?" Maddie stepped forward, wearing overalls decorated with hand-drawn flowers. A master gardener from the local nursery handed her a small tomato plant and showed her exactly how deep to dig the hole. Everyone gathered around as Maddie knelt by the planter. She worked with careful concentration, making sure the plant was straight before patting the soil around it. When she finished, she looked up at Tommy with a smile that reminded him so much of her mother. "That's perfect, honey," Tommy said, his voice thick with emotion. The crowd burst into applause. And then, as if on cue, everyone moved to their assigned areas. Some began filling planters with soil, others laid out irrigation lines, and a team started assembling the greenhouse frame. Tommy watched as Andrew rolled up his sleeves and joined a group laying pavers for the pathway. There was no trace now of the troubled young man who'd left that wallet behind. He worked alongside everyone else, laughing and sharing stories. Throughout the morning, neighbors who hadn't signed up stopped by to help. Someone brought coffee and donuts. The hardware store owner arrived with an unexpected donation of garden tools. Children ran between the planters, carrying water jugs and seed packets. By noon, the transformation was remarkable. Neat rows of vegetables and herbs filled most of the planters. The greenhouse frame stood ready for its panels. Benches and tables created cozy gathering spots throughout the space. "Mr. Hayes?" A young volunteer approached Tommy. "We found this in one of the supply boxes." She handed him a wooden sign, freshly painted. "Hayes Community Garden, where kindness grows." Tommy traced the letters with his finger, remembering all the mornings he'd looked out at this empty lot, wishing he could do more for his community. Now, thanks to an unexpected chain of events that started with a simple act of honesty, that wish was coming true. Andrew gathered everyone together one last time. "Before we finish for the day, I want to thank Tommy Hayes. Without his integrity and compassion, none of this would exist. This garden is just the beginning of what the Caldwell Foundation plans to do here. But it's perfect that it started with growing food, because that's what Tommy has been doing for years, feeding his community in more ways than one." The crowd erupted in applause. Tommy felt Maddie's small hand slip into his as they looked out over their new garden, where the first tomato plants stood as a promise of good things to come. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the newly constructed Caldwell Community Garden. Folding chairs lined the freshly laid brick pathways, and colorful balloons bobbed gently in the spring breeze. The scent of blooming flowers mingled with the aroma of barbecue from the food trucks parked nearby. Tommy adjusted his tie nervously as he watched people filing in. The whole town seemed to have turned out for the grand opening. Elderly couples walked arm in arm down the paths, admiring the raised garden beds filled with fresh herbs and vegetables. Children darted between the rows of newly planted fruit trees, their laughter carrying across the garden. Andrew stood near the small stage they'd set up, looking relaxed in a casual blazer and jeans, a far cry from the troubled young man who'd first walked into the diner months ago. He chatted easily with locals, his smile genuine and warm. "The turnout's amazing," Gina said, appearing beside Tommy with a tray of lemonade. She'd insisted on helping cater the event, bringing half the diner staff with her. "Who would have thought our little corner of town could look like this?" Where there had once been just an empty lot behind the diner, now stood neat rows of community garden plots. A cheerful red gazebo marked the center, surrounded by benches and picnic tables. Along one side, a teaching area waited for the cooking classes they planned to offer. The local high school band struck up a gentle tune as more people arrived. Tommy spotted several familiar faces, regulars from the diner, teachers from Maddie's school. Even the mayor had shown up. His daughter flitted through the crowd in her favorite blue dress, handing out program cards she'd helped design. "5 minutes until we start," the event coordinator whispered, touching Tommy's elbow. He nodded, watching as Charles Caldwell was carefully helped from his car by his nurse. The older man moved slowly with a cane now, but his eyes were bright as he took in the transformed space. When he caught Tommy's gaze, he offered a small but genuine smile. At precisely 4 o'clock, Andrew stepped up to the microphone. The crowd settled into their seats, a gentle hush falling over the garden. "Welcome, everyone," Andrew began, his voice clear and strong. "A few months ago, I walked into Hayes' Diner with nothing but a heavy heart and a wallet full of cash." He paused, meeting Tommy's eyes. I was lost then, running from my family, from responsibility, from myself. But that morning, I left something behind, and what happened next changed everything. The crowd listened intently as Andrew recounted the story of Tommy's honesty, of their unlikely friendship, of the reconciliation with his father. One act of integrity, he continued, can ripple out in ways we never expect. Tommy Hayes didn't just return my wallet that day. He returned my faith in people, in second chances, in the power of doing what's right, even when it's hard. Tommy felt his cheeks warm as several people turned to smile at him. Maddie, sitting in the front row, beamed with pride. This garden, Andrew gestured to the space around them, is more than just plots of earth and plants. It's a symbol of what can grow when we choose to trust each other, to help each other, to believe in each other. Every vegetable harvested here will go to local food banks. Every cooking class taught will help families learn about nutrition. Every gathering held will strengthen our community bonds. When Andrew finished, the applause was heartfelt and warm. He introduced Charles, who stood carefully and spoke briefly but movingly about legacy, about learning that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the lives you touched. Then it was Tommy's turn. He walked to the microphone, his hands steady despite his nerves. The faces before him were familiar. People he'd served coffee to for years, neighbors who'd helped watch Maddie when he worked late, friends who'd supported him after his wife passed. I'm not much for fancy speeches, he began, earning a few knowing chuckles. But I know something about hope. Hope is what gets you through the tough mornings when you're not sure how you'll make rent. Hope is what makes you keep trying when it seems easier to give up. He paused, gathering his thoughts. This garden grew from hope. Hope that doing the right thing matters. Hope that neighbors will help neighbors. Hope that faith in people isn't foolish. His voice grew stronger. I see that hope right here, in every person who volunteered to build these beds, in every seed planted, in every plan made to share what we grow. The evening light had begun to soften, casting long shadows across the garden. My wife used to say that the best meals weren't about the food, they were about the people you shared them with. This garden isn't just about vegetables. It's about sharing. It's about making sure no one in our community goes hungry. It's about teaching our children that we take care of each other. As Tommy concluded his speech, the band began playing again softly. People rose, mingling and making their way to the food trucks and refreshment tables. Charles beckoned Andrew over, and Tommy watched father and son talking quietly together, their previous tension replaced by a careful warmth. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, casting a magical light over the garden. Tommy felt a small tug on his sleeve and looked down to find Maddie beside him. Her eyes were fixed on the colorful horizon, a thoughtful expression on her young face. Mom would have loved this, she said softly. The golden light of sunset painted long shadows across the diner's worn linoleum floor. The grand opening celebration of the Caldwell Community Garden had wound down, leaving behind the kind of tired satisfaction that comes from a day well spent. A few regulars lingered over coffee and pie, their quiet conversations mixing with the soft clink of dishes and the gentle hum of the old ceiling fans. Tommy stood behind the counter, his hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee, watching Maddie carefully remove her latest drawing from her backpack. She handled it with such care, smoothing out the corners that had gotten slightly bent during the day's festivities. Can you help me hang it up, Dad? Maddie asked, holding the colorful piece of paper to her chest. Tommy smiled, reaching under the counter for the roll of clear tape he kept there. Of course, sweetie. Where do you want it to go? Maddie's eyes scanned the wall, which was already decorated with local photographs, old newspaper clippings, and previous artwork she'd created over the years. Right there, she said, pointing to a spot next to the window, where everyone can see it when they come in. Together, they walked to the spot she'd chosen. Tommy lifted her up so she could reach higher, and she carefully positioned the drawing. It was done in her favorite colored pencils, the special set Andrew had given her last week. The picture showed 5 figures standing in front of what was unmistakably the diner, complete with the new garden visible in the background. Tell me about everyone in the drawing, Tommy said softly, though he already knew who each figure represented. Maddie pointed to each person as she named them. That's you, Dad, she said, indicating the tallest figure wearing an apron. And that's me next to you. The smaller figure had long brown hair and was wearing a blue dress, the same one she'd worn to the gala. Then there's Andrew, she continued, pointing to a figure in a business suit but with a bright smile. And Mr. Charles in his wheelchair. She'd drawn him with kind eyes and gray hair, sitting in front of the others. Tommy noticed she'd left one figure for last, the one drawn slightly above the others, with wings and a gentle smile. "And who's that?" he asked gently, though his heart already knew the answer. "That's Mom," Maddie said quietly. "She's watching over all of us." Tommy swallowed hard, giving Maddie a squeeze. The ache of missing Sarah never really went away, but somehow it felt different now, less sharp, more like a warm reminder of love that remained. The bell above the door chimed, and Andrew walked in, shaking snow from his coat. He'd changed from his earlier suit into more casual clothes, looking more relaxed than Tommy had ever seen him. "I thought I'd find you both here," Andrew said, making his way over to them. He stopped to look at the drawing, and his expression softened. "Is this new?" Maddie nodded eagerly. "Do you like it? See, there you are, and there's your dad too." "I love it," Andrew said, his voice thick with emotion. "Dad will too. I'll take a picture to show him when I visit tomorrow." The last few months had changed so much. Charles was slowly recovering at home, and while he still had his gruff moments, the walls between him and Andrew were coming down brick by brick. Their weekly visits had become something both men looked forward to, even if neither would admit it out loud. The kitchen door swung open, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. Gina, Tommy's longtime co-worker, emerged with a fresh pot. "Anyone need a refill?" she called out, then noticed the small gathering by the wall. "Oh, is this the famous artist's latest masterpiece?" More customers drifted over to see what the commotion was about. Soon, a small crowd had gathered, admiring Maddie's work and talking about the day's events. Mrs. Peterson, who'd been coming to the diner for 20 years, wiped away a tear as she looked at the drawing. "This place," she said, gesturing around the diner, "it's always been special. But now," she paused, searching for the right words, "now it feels like home for everyone." Tommy looked around at the familiar faces, at the new garden, visible through the window where volunteers had worked side by side all month, at his daughter, beaming with pride, and at Andrew, no longer the lonely young man who'd left his wallet behind that fateful morning, but family now in all the ways that mattered. The overhead lights reflected off the freshly cleaned counters, creating warm pools of light that seemed to push back against the darkness outside. Through the window, Tommy could see snow starting to fall again, but inside, the atmosphere was cozy and intimate. Someone had turned on the old radio, and soft music drifted through the air, mixing with the sounds of conversation and laughter. Maddie tugged at Tommy's sleeve. "Dad, can we have hot chocolate? To celebrate?" "Hot chocolate all around," Tommy announced, and a cheer went up from the gathered crowd. As he moved behind the counter to start preparing the drinks, he caught Andrew's eye and saw his own contentment reflected there. This was what Sarah had always said about the diner, that it wasn't just about serving food, but about creating a place where people could feel connected, where they could belong. As Tommy worked, listening to the happy murmur of voices and the occasional burst of laughter, he felt her presence more strongly than ever. The light from the diner spilled out onto the snowy street through the big front windows, creating a warm glow that cut through the winter darkness. Inside, surrounded by friends who had become family, Tommy felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. The diner had always been his anchor, but now it felt like something more, a beacon of warmth and hope, not just for him and Maddie, but for everyone who walked through its doors. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you thought this was just the beginning, you're right. Click through and see where the story takes you next. If you enjoyed the story of Tommy Hayes, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.